Chapter 673, WWW. Chapter 673, WWW. What is this? Another double chapter? Done you son of Agan. Part 1. WWW is a golden rule which must be used after every major incident. Through the WWW protocol, one learns from experience and grows as a person. This time, it was Glymet who was contemplating the WWW protocol as if almost about to hit his head against every wall and pillar inside Forelhost's tomb. Why? Because in the last fight between everyone that entered this cave, he is the last man standing. That statement includes the Dragon Priest and his minions, Messenger and his goons, and John freaking Dare and his summons. One may ask, if Glymet is the last man standing, why would he contemplate the WWW protocol? Isn't this his victory by default? That is a big no here. To tell this part of the story right, we have to rewind a wee bit to the back, right at the part where Glymet brandished the legendary katana, Goldbrand, all before Arch-Wizard Messenger, Arch-Wizard John Dare, and Arch-Wizard Dragon Priest decide to have fun blasting off stuff together. And from there, we invoke the WWW protocol correctly. So, what went wrong? A lot of undead. Glymet was sure he blasted the entire score of Draugr that was chasing swims to oblivion, but he didn't expect them to be this robust against flame magic attacks. Swoosh boom. Just by moving his head a few inches to the left, Glymet avoided a fireball aimed at his face and immediately retaliated with a shockwave spell that pushed away all the enemies that surrounded him. His last attack using Goldbrand was effective to make the undead lose their momentum, but the Dragon Priest was an excellent magic caster as it seemed and contended well against the fire attack. As for the remaining undead, they were chasing swims at night and trying to surround him, but the crafty Argonian smuggler wielded an axe and a torch which he used to make a combination of chopping and burning attacks to get himself out of trouble. With the poison that swims brewed still affecting Glymet's magicka, the situation wasn't getting any better, and all Glymet could do was rely on his agility to maneuver through the enemies and use the enchantment of Goldbrand to burn everything to a crisp. He moved rapidly and managed to land a few attacks indeed, but the Dragon Priest was teleporting all over the place in a way that outdone Glymet's maneuvers a few times in a spiral of offense and defense that felt like going forever. And just as Glymet was able to shake off the Dragon Priest and put him in a bad situation, but rumble. The whole chamber started to shake and fractures emerged on a certain wall before it got blown away. The ring. I can sense it. As those who were inside the chamber became stunned by the sudden intrusion that caused a cloud of dust to cloak out half of the chamber, a man's voice was heard as the third party showed itself. 3 mercenaries led by a blonde female, one cloaked man walking behind them, and a strange creature with the resemblance of a woman. It is around the undead's neck, the blonde woman said as she pointed towards the Dragon Priest. Get it for me. The cloaked man behind gave an order. It looked like competition had finally arrived despite entering the crypt before Glymet and swims at night. This put a lot of pressure on Glymet as he felt a threatening aura coming from the cloaked man. Where do you think you're going? But as if nothing can even threaten him, swims at night bounced out of nowhere and attacked the mercenaries who were trying to surround the Dragon Priest. He was clearly faster than them, but one of those mercenaries was clad in a hunk of metal, and, as if reading Swim's movement from the beginning, he intercepted the Argonian with ease. Good job, Cassius. We cleaned the trash first. The blonde who was on the lead threw something towards the Dragon Priest and the other undead, which started to glow in a flickering light before exploding in a cloud of blue to dark smoke with white sparkles, ones that didn't feel anyhow as pleasant as normal sparkles. Corrupted magicka bomb, a taboo item in the hand of mere mercenaries. Glymet was distracted for a moment by the bomb, but it seemed effective in containing the Dragon Priest by crippling his magicka for a moment. This would open the window for anyone to attack the Dragon Priest, especially since the treasure hunters that just barged in are in better shape than Glymet and Swims. At this moment, Glymet decided to leave the Dragon Priest and rush from the shadows to aid his friend and partner, Swims. With one swift slash, Goldbrand shone in bright fire and descended upon the mercenaries that were attacking Swims. They felt the intense heat come at them, and their leader, the blonde woman, tried to shield her face with her arms, but just before it struck them, one man stood between them and Glymit's attack, totally blocking it with his metallic arm. "That's some nasty fire you got there, sir," said the cloaked man who was arch-wizard Messenger. Daedric, I assume. Swims at night, used the window given to him by Glymit, and immediately retreated to safety behind his comrade. Glymit and Swims then took their distance from Messenger and his mercenaries. "Hey, take this." Swims passed a Magica potion to Glymit, who received it while looking at its content with one eye and his enemies with another while keeping his sword up. "Fucker." It was then when one of the mercenaries shouted with anger at Swims. From what it seemed, he seemed to have pickpocketed her offer potion, which she needed as a magic caster. "Calm down, Kamala." But Aldora... Kamala, the female orc shamaness, had to stop arguing when Aldora, the female Nord Blondie, gestured with her green eyes at Messenger. The strange atmosphere seemed to be going nowhere with this confrontation, and soon the dragon priest will recover from his stun and wreak havoc. None of the current parties had any plan for the current situation, but it was Swims who noticed it first. "Wait, there was something with them, a creature," he said. And the moment he said that, something clicked inside Glymit's head, and he immediately expanded his perception range. Like a creeping shadow, he felt a thin presence turning sharp, and in less than a second, this sharp pressure turned into a cutting edge aiming for his back. The realization came before the attack would arrive, and Glymit was defenseless, waiting for certain death. The moment he realized that, he tried to mount a defense, but death was imminent and would soon claim him. Fate has long since cast its web around Glymit's neck, and he felt it. But with a snapping sensation, this encounter with fate was torn by another fate, stronger, more domineering, tyrannical in nature, and suffocating in presence. The wall crumbled once again, and a being landed like a speeding wagon to immediately bulldoze whatever was aiming for Glymit with a strong thud. Even the amassed undead around the dragon priest were blown away, including the priest that barely retreated. The being was huge, made of bones as if it was clad in them, and had the edgiest style a man can ever imagine. It was a bone colossus, no mistake about it. Still, its appearance was refined in the shape of an angry Akaviri warrior. Beneath, it was the creature that was going after Glymit. Long-limbed and pale, its face was that of a woman, but its mind was clearly feral. Grrrr. The creature made growls of a beast in the face of the bone colossus, fearless, almost brainless. Maven, 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 he. The colossus laughed menacingly. Killing your empty husk won't be satisfying enough, but here we go. Wywell Torshul. The burial chamber shook with the power of the Thursday coming from the bone colossus, or rather from within it, and the target of that flaming Thursday was none other than the strange woman creature that was held beneath it. Just like how Glymit used Goldbrand, but way stronger, a breath of fire emerged from the words of that bone colossus being and struck its target splendidly. SUE. The fire hit the ground and spread, widened, overtaking the entire space ground of the chamber, and shook its walls. Those who evaded it had to be smart. Messenger cast a ward around himself. The dragon priest lifted himself in the air. The mercenaries found pillars and broken stones to hang on, while Glymit used Goldbrand to cut the flames away from him and Swims. The only victims here were the last remaining batch of undead, whose survival instincts weren't that functional, and the creature made from the fragments of the once Maven Blackbriar. As his victims crumbled to ash in his hand, the bone colossus stood straight and watched the fire fade away before lingering around exclusively to flammable surfaces and illuminating the once dimly lit chamber. There, he felt the magic of Forelhost weaken and decided he no longer had to keep that appearance. The bone colossus was obviously wrath, and as an undead being, it can freely enter Forelhost. John used this fact and entered inside wrath by altering some of its interior to fit him like oversized armor. So, now that he confirmed that the magic of Foral Host won't be able to send him out, he tore open a part of Wrath and jumped out while examining his surroundings with a menacing look in his eyes. Part 2. Walking out from the power armor like Wrath, John looked around the destruction he just caused. "Messenger, you there?" John called. "I am." A reply came as a man emerged from the place John was looking at. Hiding seemed impossible when John Dare would come ready and looking. "Here you are." John smiled. "Sorry about your girlfriend." "What a waste," Messner replied. "I was almost at a breakthrough with that soul experience you insinuated me with." The air between the two was tense, so the people around them felt that the Magica was intensely moving between the two in an agitated manner. They felt like two polar opposites who would attract and handle Magica differently, yet similarly. The duality of the Magica spiral caused by the two was risky enough to erase this tomb from existence. But right when nobody expected it, the duality became trinity with the sound of shattering glass. There, Glymet stood at an opposite spot from the two arch-wizards, and his Magica fluctuated and interacted with theirs to create a third spiral around him. Glymet recovered using the Magica potion that Swims just snatched, and the true face of a third arch-wizard was revealed. "Well, I'll be damned." John laughed, not from surprise, but from the irony of this situation. Two beings equal to himself in terms of the magic ability stood against him, and he bared their fangs. "I didn't expect that." Even Messner was shaken a little, but only just a little, as understood that the third arch-wizard is a spell's word, which is more predictable than the Dragonborn mystic John Dare. "Nice of you to show up, John Rad." And then Glymet spoke. "What?" Messner felt immediately threatened, as the idea of those two being friendly to one another meant that his fate was immediately sealed. "The fuck?" But John's reaction was a sudden shrink. "I fucking do a skincare routine and use shampoo. Take that back, you old fart." John's reaction caused Glymet to be stunned and Messner to frown. So it's John the Younger." John hilled. Glymet then immediately realized who was who. "For God's sake, get your eyes checked, old man." John replied. "Whoever you are, hope you're not here for the artifact." "Too late, kid," Glymet replied. "Hold your horses, the two of you." Messner then interfered. "Only one of us can get that thing and use it." His words were subtle, but he aimed to drive a wedge between John and Glymet, so they don't end up ganging up on him. The three-way standoff became tenser than ever before, and just like that, the mercenaries covered Messner's back, Swims at Night covered Glymet's back, and Wrath covered John's back. Plans started getting made, and simulations in everyone's brains were run once, twice, thrice. The Dragon Priest was recovering on a fourth front, and his Magica was moving as vigorously as the three arch-wizards to create a fourth spiral. For arch-wizards, just when the Dragon Priest fully recovers, it will attack indiscriminately thanks to its lich nature and hatred towards the living as an undead. There was little time, and everyone had a rough idea about the other one. Arch-wizard Messner, an artificer with a lot of surprises and endless thoughts on Magica output. Arch-wizard Glymet, a spell's word with a flaming sword artifact that seemed remarkably dangerous to contend against in close range, even for John. Arch-wizard John Dare, a mystic warrior and a voice master, meaning that he can put enough fight to hold two fronts, and his trump card seems scarier than whatever Messner or Glymet can come up with. And the Dragon Priest was a wild card. In their eyes, both Glymet and Messner saw John Dare as the most demanding threat and had to isolate him first before snatching the ring as fast as they could. But there were more variables still. Messner had his mercenaries, who would throw themselves between three arch-wizard for the booty thereafter. Glymet had Swims at Night, who is a fearless warrior and can act roguishly in critical times like these. John Dare had a bone colossus, and his worldwide reputation always had it that he can summon weird monstrosities. The Dragon Priest had no support, on the other hand. Whatever happens now, it will go. Swims at Night shouted, and it was he and Glymet who acted first. Glymet slashed Goldbrand diagonally, starting with John and ending with Messenger to create a wave of searing flames that would devour the two, except that it lost its power too quickly. From within these flames, Swims at Night jumped at the dragon priest and chopped off the hand holding the staff to punch. John was immediately onto Swims as he punched the Argonian's face with the back of his fist and reached out immediately for the chain holding the ring to the dragon priest's neck. Pulse. But just as John was about to reach the ring, a blue wave of energy struck his face as it seemed Messenger's hand had turned into a cannon and shot John in the face. Yet in an impressive reaction speed, Pride appeared from its invisible state and took the hit for John, but instead of suffering any damage, it completely reflected the attack towards Glymet. Glymet's reaction was timely, and as he saw Swims get punched away, he returned Goldbrand to its sheath and used it as a shield, just like how Pride did. The energy attack was reflected again, but this time it was up to the ceiling to create a hole from which one can see the sky. Nobody cared about the hole in the ceiling just yet, and as John was the closest to the dragon priest and almost about to snatch the ring, the magicaster among the mercenaries, Kamala, used her magic to teleport the dragon priest away from John's clutch. John may have almost caught the dragon priest's head, but as it slipped from his fingers, he could only rip off the dragon priest's mask. God damn it! It was too risky to take the dragon priest in their direction, especially when Messenger was busy fending off an attack mounted against him by the Bone Colossus, so Kamala decided to put the dragon priest up in the air between the three parties. Meanwhile, the Nord Blondie Aldora oversaw the situation from behind Messenger and shouted, "Messenger, the string!" Her voice caused Messenger to escape from Wrath's attack range, and from an implant on his mechanical arm, Messenger shot white threads made of ancestor silk and coated in pure magicka. The strings reached out to the three mercenaries, and Aldora was the last to receive it. Aldora then shouted once again, "Skywag!" A screech of a bird followed her shout, and at an incredible speed of flashing lightning, a peregrine falcon stooped through the opening in the ceiling and reached the dragon priest in less than a second. Before even the dragon priest would react to his teleportation, the peregrine falcon Skywag tore the chain holding the ring and could almost fly away with it. "Throw me!" Swims at Night shouted, and in an instant reaction, Glymet blasted his friend with a non-lethal force spell towards the falcon and the ring. Kitty cat. Even John extended his left arm, and a shadow of a feline swooshed at an incredible speed towards the falcon and the ring. In the same instant, another white string came from Messenger's arm and tied itself to the falcon holding the ring. Swims at Night was fast enough for his Argonian claws to almost touch the ring. Nefertiti was also aiming for the red ring, and seemed pretty sure she could get it, as she was already touching it. Skywag the falcon was following the order of its master, Aldora, and ready to bolt away. But it all happened in an instant. The dragon priest was there at the middle of it all, and having his dragon priest mask taken from him, as well as being played by the mortals around him, made him summon one final effort of retaliation and called his magicka to strike whosoever nearest to him. A bolt of lightning came from the dragon priest, and it struck Swims at Night, Nefertiti, and Skywag. The ring known as the Barilzer's Mazed Band was a magic item that was enchanted just like anything else, and a magicka that struck it was just enough to make it function. First, it was Swims at Night, Nefertiti, and Skywag who were swept in by a sudden red flash and disappeared. Following them was the group tethered magically to Skywag, Messenger and his mercenaries, just as Aldora had planned. But with Nefertiti getting teleported away, John felt a sudden change within him, and the look on his face changed. Glymet could see the shock on John's face and his lips trying to pronounce a word starting with F, but in the same red flash, John Dare disappeared from the tomb's chamber along with the summons. The corpse of the dragon priest, charred black by its last effort for retaliation, landed on the floor with a thud to cause a twitch to appear on the face of the last man standing. Glymet. He couldn't foresee this one, not in such a situation. It felt like a disaster. His friend Swims at Night disappeared right in front of his eyes, and the son of Jonrad, his old war friend, also disappeared in the same way. The WWW protocol activated immediately, and he started asking himself what went wrong and how it did, but he couldn't fathom the answer. He only knew one thing, and that is the enchantment on Berilzer's mazed band. The ring was a backdoor to a different world. That's why John Dare disappeared when his familiar spirit was transported there too. It is the only logical explanation. Glymet is still an arch-wizard specializing in illusions and alterations, but he was mostly self-taught, and he has no knowledge of dimensional travel. The only person he could ask for help right now is Loneth, and she is in Winterhold, the home of John Dare. This was too much for Glymet at the moment. He couldn't think straight when talking about meeting Loneth, whom he was separated from for years, and meeting John Rad to tell him that his son disappeared like that. He had to go. He had to meet Loneth and figure out a way to cross dimensions to where Swims at night and John Dare are to rescue them. He has to go after them to the realm of the great Sothis Sil, Clockwork City. Chapter 674, The Frozen Path. Chapter 674, The Frozen Path. Another double chapter since I wasn't able to publish for the past week. The VPN service I used was blocked from Egypt along with many others. It was kind of impossible to access, so I couldn't do much, but after a lot of time trying to get it to work, I managed to get a Chrome extension VPN of all things to work. Well, whatever gets the job done, I guess. Part 1. Disasters strike with fortune on their heels. A concept of seeing the world that saved many souls more than any would dare count. A concept that pushed Glymet up from the disaster he just witnessed and put him on a straight path towards Winterhold. Old as he may look, the 50-year-old man was rushing on an exhausted horse that was the third on his journey. He would stop in every village with a good stable and switch horses not to get any horse lame and keep on a steady pace to the city. In the matter of 2 days, which is a record by itself, Glymet arrived at the entrance of Winterhold, passed the checkpoint, and rushed straight to the city. It was common knowledge that the Dare Dragon Trading Company had its old headquarters located in the main city of Winterhold, right beside the Jarl's Longhouse. In the recent months, the manor which belonged to House Dare was attacked by the dragon cult, and John Dare relocated to the Dare Tower in the city of New Sarthel with his family. But the old place still houses the top brass of the company, including the management offices, which John Dare seconds-in-command are stationed during his absence. But the moment Glymet stepped past the gates of the city, something terrible happened. Run! The mages! They've lost it. They're acting mad, and here we thought we could trust them. Seeing many people rush in the opposite direction while he was getting off his horse and tying it to a post, Glymet went ahead immediately and rushed north to the College of Winterhold, the destination he was aiming for. What he found was another disaster brewing in a spherical shape around the grand building of the college. Standing on a spire rising from the sea, the College of Winterhold was shrouded in both honor and infamy. By having its bad relationship fixed with the local for the past couple of years, the college was on the way to being the jewel of the North as it always should have been. But today, and upon Glymet's arrival, the college was shrouded in a sphere of wild magica, rather than honor and infamy and whatnot. The sphere of wild magica seemed to be causing the wind to whirl and the weather to rumble. A storm started to appear on the horizon, as if something sinister was brewing far into the sea, and an untimely spring storm formed above the city. Glymet helped some of the citizens get up as they ran away from the direction of the College of Winterhold, and as he reached it, he noticed that many young mages were running on the college's bridge, some bearing strange injuries, and others fully unconscious. On the heels of the retreating mages was a Dunmare woman that was leading the crowd. She seemed to have been through a rough fight, and her face carried serious expressions, but aside from the anger and the shock, she was keeping all the young mages in order. Retreat. Put on warding formation at the 6th and the 5th allies. Make sure the people don't get near this place. And somebody find me Alina. The woman kept ordering the other teachers around, while Glymet was looking between the crowds to see if Loneth was among the teachers. He looked and looked again, but he felt like she wasn't among this crowd at all. He then headed towards the Dunmare mage, leading the evacuation efforts, and was about to ask her about Loneth, if not for what happened next. All Glymet could do was unsheath his sword and rush towards the woman with swift steps. Nurina was a second too late to react to Glymet, but he passed her like swift wind, and behind her, she could feel the resonance of magicka types clashing against one another. Just one look, and she realized that the man had attacked something made of pure magicka and shattered it with a swing of his blade. Be on guard. Magicka anomalies are forming. Nurina shouted in the crowd of mages before turning to Glymet. Thank you. Loneth, where is she? Glymet didn't have time for pleasantries and cut to the chase right away. Inside, Nurina replied. She's trapped with other teachers and students. Please, be patient. We will sort this out. Sort this out. Glymet looked at Nurina with a face filled with disbelief. I can't wait. He immediately darted off towards the college's bridge and rushed at the strange white spherical barrier. Nurina's shout for him to wait fell on deaf ears as he held his sword with two hands and attempted to slash at the barrier before he realized the stupidness of his actions. His attack fell as if it was repulsed by a wall of metal that was left unshaken in the face of his fruitless strike. Moreover, the barrier formed a repulsive force that hit him back with the same amount of force he exerted and caused him to lose control of his energies for a second. This second was all that needed to send him off the bridge of the college down to the abyss below the college's spire. Hold on. But as soon as his senses came back to him, he was being lifted in the air by a mighty, powerful magical force that levitated him all the way back to the beginning of the bridge of the college. Rush like that again at your own peril, stranger, Nurina shouted at Glymet as she placed him on the ground. This is a force beyond our understanding. Glymet shook his head left and right to restore his jumbled senses and sat up while looking between Nurina and the college. Loneth is in there, he said desperately. I can't leave her. Loneth is one of the most capable people I know. She'll handle herself and her students. Nurina replied. It's not the right time or place to waste it for talking, but if you are a friend of Loneth, then you know a thing or two about what she can do. Glymet's face was still painted with all shades of shock and worry, but all he could do was nod. You're an adventurer? Nurina asked. I am, Glymet replied. Then I have a task for you, she said. Head out to the neighboring city of Sarthal, to the Dare Tower, and ask where Alina Dare is. John must have left her with something to deal with this. Tell her that the magicka of Winterhold is being siphoned by the eye. Glymet's senses were still coming back together, but he understood what to do. Alina, he asked for more details. Alina Dare, Nurina replied naturally, the wife of John Dare. Oh. Glymet felt like his head was being hit with something heavy since it seemed unavoidable to run into the Dares and the Firemen's without consulting with Loneth first. Fine, I'll deliver the news. Seeing the middle-aged adventurer stand up and rush outside the city, Nurina put her full focus on studying and dealing with the barrier that was creeping out of the college. Moreover, there was a danger coming from behind, as the people of Winterhold and the whole guards were all agitated with the sight of a disaster brewing over their city. It seemed to have reminded them of their hatred towards the college and the great collapse. Faralda, talk to me. Nurina called Faralda, who was busy getting rid of the magicka, anomalies, and defending the people. What? Faralda had a lever post for a young mage and approached Nurina while being on the lookout. What would John do in a situation like this with the people? Nurina asked as she looked with worry towards the city. He's your son. You should know best. Faralda replied right away. But I can't just make a mistake here. This is a very sensitive issue, and the college's reputation is on the line. Nurina showed her worry since neither John nor Archmage Savos are here to deal with this sort of stuff. Just focus on one thing, honey. Faralda held Nurina's shoulders. The barrier, the anomalies, or the people. I'll do the barrier, Nurina said with a stern look on her face. Once Alina comes, I know she'll have something in her sleeve for this situation, and I'll handle the anomalies. What do you want me to do then? Faralda asked. Coordinate with the Jarl. I am not as proficient as John in politics, but we can buy some time with the people if we tell them that the Thalmor are trying to invade the college. Who's not proficient with politics again? Faralda smiled, in order to ease Nurina off. Just go, woman. Nurina smiled, but her face hardened back once again. She was obviously worried. Many of the kids are still in there. Some of her friends, including Lonith, are still in there as well, and her cousin, Archmage Savozarin, is in there. So what exactly happened, and what is this attack? Earlier this morning, a man known as Enchanting, the Thalmor emissary to the College of Winterhold, invaded the college's Hall of Elements and started to argue with the Archmage. By the time Nurina arrived at the scene, Enchanting and Savos were agitated at one another with their staves in their hands. Nurina could hear Enchanting telling Savos that the dawn of magic is wasted on a place like Winterhold. That was a reference to the Eye of Magnus that was located in the Hall of Elements, since its origin is associated with the beings of the Dawn era. As their conversation reached nowhere, it appeared that Enchanting had found a way to tap into the magic of the Eye and wanted to transfer it back to Alinar to the Almarai Dominion. Savozarin opposed this and kept Enchanting in check, but the latter used the Eye to cast a powerful barrier that would separate the rest of the college's staff and students and push them out while he prepares for moving the Eye. Nurina tried to intervene, but she couldn't overpower the barrier cast by the Eye and eventually got pushed out as well. Even her chaos infection wasn't working on the barrier, and it felt as if the two things were made of something similar, so they can't oppose one another. This was maddening to Nurina, and she knew that John, whose knowledge of the future has been very accurate so far, is having Alina deal with things related to the college, and something like this is hardly outside his scope of perception, especially when he warned her not to get into fights with Enchanting. So, if Alina gets here, she should be able to deal with this as far as Nurina is hoping for. If not, this will turn into a true disaster. Part 2. Glymet knew that the only way to Lonith is behind that barrier, and if John Dare's wife is the key to it, he should put aside his feeling of guilt and ask her for help. As he arrived in Sarthal, the news about the trouble in Winterhold seemed to have been faster than him, and he found it easy to get to the Dare Tower under the pretext of delivering a message. He didn't meet Alina Dare as he hoped, but he could recognize that the youth gathered in the tower were firemen's, and some of them seemed outsiders, but what they all had in common was their overflowing power and talent. As he reported to the one standing in the center, a large young man with black hair and sideburns, the group started looking at each other and whispering about Alina. They all carried their weapons and told Glymet to rush with them to Winterhold and wait for Alina there. Just like her husband, she seemed to have gone on a small adventure too. None of them seemed as impressive as the Dunmare wizard lady who was standing in front of the college, but Glymet knew that this is as far as he can do for now. With them, he returned to Winterhold, and they all started to organize the scene. An hour later, Glymet could see a creature speeding through the sky, and since he was the first to notice, others looked at where he was looking and reacted immediately. "It is the griffin!" Isha shouted. "Alina has returned." Glymet frowned at the sight of the creature, but it was indeed a woman riding a snow-capped griffin that is rare even in Somerset Isles. She kept rushing with the griffin towards the barrier and held forward a staff that had a strong and impressive aura. The staff shot a strong ray of arcane power and clashed with the barrier, causing part of the barrier to collapse, almost enough for the griffin to fly in. The barrier kept crumbling slowly, and those who were outside readied themselves to swarm in. As that happened, Nurina and Glymet were pushing their magicka against the barrier. While Nurina was methodically destroying the barrier, Glymet was chipping its parts like a fighter rather than a magic caster. Still, Nurina noticed that he was a high-level magicka user. As they all pushed through all the way to the Hall of the Elements, it was only Nurina and Glymet who endured the anomaly of magicka all the way where Alina was dueling Enchanting. Enchanting was using the Eye of Magnus, whose parts opened up and turned from a sphere into different unstable shapes. Alina was using a staff with a design very close to the Eye of Magnus, so it was safe to assume that this is the Staff of Magnus, the most powerful magic staff known, and an artifact made by a divine being. Alina was skillful enough to keep the eye contained while using a sword on the other hand to send energy attacks at Enchanting. While her skills were impressive, she couldn't put enough disadvantage on Enchanting just yet. He was using the Eye of Magnus to grant himself 9 invincibility, something that Alina could take away from him by the staff she wielded. However, once Glymet and Nurina joined the fray, Encano's magical invincibility was bound to not last him longer than this. Still, Nurina looked around before doing anything and noticed that her cousin, Savos Aran, was resting his back on a pillar before with his appearance being pale and weak. He was gravely injured by magic, and he was getting tended to by Maribel Irvine, who managed to take him away from Encano once Alina arrived. As for Glymet, he finally saw the one he was looking for. Lonith, Glym? The moment he saw her hiding with a group of apprentices and protecting them from Encano, he immediately left the quest of pushing ahead and ran towards her. "I'll get you out of here," he said, and tried to get her out. "No," Lonith refused. "I am helping Alina. You get the apprentices away from here." "I'm here for you," Glymet insisted. "Come on. One of us stays and covers the retreat. The other has to evacuate them. Your choice." Lonith insisted with a face filled with determination. To see her after so many years in a situation like this, Glymet's heart was filled with sadness and grief, but he had to do what he had to do. "You go. I'll stay." He turned away with his hand on his sword's hilt, ready to participate in the fight against Encano. "Let's go. I'll cover you all." As for Lonith, she led the apprentices that were trapped inside out. As she led them away from the fight, Lonith took one final look at the sight of Glymet as he headed back into the Hall of the Elements, where a fight of blinding lights and divine artifacts was taking place. Between the holder of the Eye of Magnus and the holder of the Staff of Magnus, the holder of Goldbrand would at least tip the scale for the side of good. The Eye of Magnus is believed to be a literal body part of Magnus, leader of the Magnago, the original spirits that fled the creation of Mundus after the scheme of Lorcan took effect and rendered many immortal spirits mortal. As a survivor of the mortal prison of Mundus, Magnus is an important figure to the mortality-hating elves. An artifact such as the Eye of Magnus is a sure way to negate the effects of mortality and ascend as immortals, or so many would be led to believe. Just as Encano tried to activate the eye and draw power from it, he caused the magic of the world around him to go on a rampage. Alina knew thanks to John that she had to collect a staff from a dangerous dungeon once she sees the signs that something is brewing within the college. She ventured to the Labyrinthian, a dangerous dungeon constructed by Archmage Shalater, founder of Winterhold and the college, on the bones of an ancient Nordic city to test the new archmages of the college. With the staff being the reward, Alina headed back with it to face the trouble caused by Encano. The reason for that is the fact that the Staff of Magnus is the only thing that can control the Eye of Magnus, which brings us to the current situation. With Encano hell-bent on exploiting the eye, Alina worked on sealing the eye once again in order to cut off the power that made Encano invincible. With that, she hammered Encano with all the firepower she could muster, but she needed more help. Seeing Nurina rush to her aid, Alina became more confident and used her sword to corner Encano enough in order to make him easy prey for Nurina's heavy attacks. Yet despite the tactic, one variable was entering the stage with extreme power. A swordsman rushed past Encano and defeated the Atronax that he summoned with a flaming sword before arriving behind the Altmare and driving his sword into Encano's back. The protection Encano drew from the eye was wearing off, but it could put a halt to Glymet's stab. Still, Encano was pushed down to the ground and tried to crawl away to get closer to the eye. Alina shifted her focus on the Eye of Magnus and used the staff to seal it quicker than before to assist the swordsman who was keeping Encano occupied. At such a rate, Alina sealed the Eye of Magnus by 90%. Nurina stopped Encano from casting any spell, and Glymet had him pinned down by the sword. "No, let me." "You can't. You fools. The power to unmake the world. It's not meant for humans. You won't. AR." John mentioned nothing about taking Encano alive, but the moment he was almost subdued without killing him, something started to change. Encano's energy started to shift and flow beyond Nurina's restriction, and even further from what Encano can control. He started screaming and screeching as if he was burning from inside and around his body, white fractures started to form. Glymet retreated and saw the magicka around Enchanto's body materialize and get siphoned by the eye. An artifact started to devour a mortal's soul, something that can only be done by a soul gem. But rather than emptying Enchanto's astral form of its energy and damning it to the soul cairn, the entire ghost of Enchanto was being enthralled by the eye. It was different from necromancy or soul manipulation magic. The sacred Anuic visage of the soul itself was being devoured by the eye. Enchanto was being undone, and what was left behind was nothing but the white ash of his disintegrated corpse. Glymet looked at the thing that was once a person and looked at the eye of Magnus. It wasn't fully sealed yet, and some of its cracks showed its white, glowing interior. Alina was working hard to seal the eye, so she wasn't noticing what Glymet had noticed, and right in there was a silhouette, a being, an entity. It wasn't the elf that disintegrated just now. It was something ominous, deep, unfathomable, and it was gazing at Glymet as he gazed at it just as the eye was fully shut. You'll love the coming plot after this last foreshadowing. Chapter 675. Prepare for the Clockwork. Chapter 675. Prepare for the Clockwork. Hello. My name is Don, and I specialize in double chapters. Right arrow, https://linktr. ee/Donavel, left arrow. Part 1. The fight with Enchanto took a toll not only on the college, but on the entire city. A lot of damage happened due to the strange, anomalous wisps that started to appear and randomly attack everything. While the local blamed the mages for not controlling their experiments, and wanted them to just dispel the things, the mages insisted that these wisps are the byproduct of the Thalmer's attack on the college, and it would have been much worse if not for the rapid response of Lady Alina. It is a known fact that House Dare and the Thalmer are the very prime example of archenemies, and siding with one is automatically being an enemy of the other. John Dare stated many times in public that if any Nord on Nirn was to ever support the Thalmer, he would go right to their homes and burn it down on their heads. So this was as far as things would go. However, this is the first time the Thalmer attacked after the Battle of Winterhold, when John slew 10 of their archwizards when he was on God mode. Even when John was absent for 3 years, they didn't retaliate at Winterhold ever. This caused a little bit of confusion in the rumors that were being spread. But the confusion was a good thing in this situation. Alina had to take the next day, working on soothing the city and repairing the damages to the college. She even spread some of the rumors herself and showed up on the doorsteps of many houses in order to heal anyone injured and such. During her visits, she made sure to spread some rumors. The first was that Archmage Savos Aran was a victim of an assassination attempt, and he is now in critical condition. The second was the fact that the College of Winterhold houses a score of expert and master mages, who in terms of power are at par with John's occasional displays of power. Moreover, there is a handful of archwizards in the college, including Archmage Savos, Lady Nerina, and Master Talfdir. While in terms of raw firepower, John was a brute of a wizard with many deadly toys in his arsenal. The rest of the archwizards are able enough to put on the same level of display. Alina made sure to deliver those facts subtly and carefully to embed them into the hearts of the people and make them aware that there is no good in confronting the mages, and making sure to remind them that such a confrontation will be exactly what the Thalmer hoped for. But away from all the crowd control, Alina was worried sick about this whole situation. Archmage Savos was indeed in a critical condition since he suffered the full burst of energy coming from the eye of Magnus. Moreover, Nerina hasn't left his side since then, and she seemed to be in great sadness. According to Nerina, John seemed to have passed a gift to Archmage Savos once he returned to Skyrim last year. John said that this artifact was something that he discovered in Elsewhere, and it is used to nourish the vitality of its user. Such an artifact was precious to any mage in any class of the arcane arts, and Savos decided to keep it on himself. According to Mirabelle Irvine, this artifact glowed in red aura and released a whisper of Thursdayum that seemed to have been stored inside. This somehow saved the life of Savos Aran. It also meant that John lied about the artifact being from elsewhere and was aware that the Archmage's life would be in danger. How Nurina felt about this concerned Alina quite a bit, but it seemed that she was more worried for Savos rather than being mad at John for not telling her what he knows. On another front, there was the matter with the Eye of Magnus. Alina wanted to move it away and seal it with the Staff of Magnus, but 4 monks from the Sigic Order appeared and said that they would take it away. Alina was furious at them and accused them of standing aside and watching while letting the disaster brew in front of their eyes. Coronir, the leader of the 4 monks, apologized to Alina and told her that even her husband John knew something like this would happen and didn't seem to be interrupting fate as well. However, once Coronir found out that Archmage Savos was rescued, his face showed surprise for the first time and started stuttering around his words as if that was out of his calculations. Coronir then told Alina that in any case, Archmage Savos won't be able to keep his duties as Archmage for long, and as the person who conquered the Labyrinthian of Archmage Shalater, there is no one as fit as her to take the mantle of the Archmage of the College of Winterhold. This worried Alina quite a bit, but at the same time, it was an honor greater than anything she can ever think of. Being a Nord and an Archmage of the College will take the institution to new heights in Skyrim among the Nords once this recent incident passes smoothly. It will also give House Dare a very incredible boost since, from this moment, they will control both the city and the college, a unification that has never occurred since the time of the college's foundation. And so, the whole situation in the city was being managed. Still, another situation was brewing inside the Dare Tower where Glymet met Jonrad. "I am sorry. Your son was taken to another world." "Yeaweas." Jonrad's reaction wasn't expected by Glymet, or rather it was expected from Jonrad, knowing his situation with John. "Shut up, John." But it was Hilda that shouted at him and turned to Glymet with a serious face. "What happened?" "Glym." Glymet's eyes were narrowed as he looked at Jonrad while he started to tell Hilda his account of what happened in the rift and to her son. He also highlighted the critical detail that their son was taken to Clockwork City by the ring known as Berilzer's Maze Band. To his stupid lawyer face, Jonrad shouted again, in absolute happiness. "Will you be quiet? I just put the kids to bed." Hilda focused her fiery glares at Jonrad once again. "It is just, honey, when that boy made fun of me last time at Solitude while I was drunk, I've been meaning to return the favor, and Glymet here helped me out so." Jonrad tried to explain his latest grudge with John. "I didn't do anything to him." But Glymet defended himself right away. "We were all trying to acquire the ring, and your son was tossing everyone left and right. I swear no one had the chance to do anything with him being that aggressive." "Don't worry about it, Glym." Hilda assured Glymet that he is not in any trouble and returned to her husband. "You and I need to talk." "Oh." Jonrad realized that he is in for an earful. But just as they were meeting at the entrance of the second section in the tower, Alina walked in with a tired face. "I want to sleep so bad," she said as she dragged herself across the hallway before running into the 3 elders. "Oh, I didn't realize we had a guest. You are the adventurer who helped last night." "Alina, this is Glymet, a friend from the war days." Hilda introduced Glymet to Alina. "Oh, hello." Alina's face turned bright right away. "Jonrad told us a lot about you." "You're young John's wife?" Glymet asked while trying to be careful around his words. "Yes, did he do anything bad?" Alina asked while being fully prepared for what comes. "He was forcibly taken to Clockwork City," Hilda said. "Oh no." Alina's reaction was that of pure shock, without me. "Forcibly taken." Glymet highlighted the important words. "Come on." Alina held her head. "Being forcibly taken to another world again. Damn it." She then turned to Hilda. "Mom, Dad, if I find out that your son has cheated on me over there, he's all yours, daughter." Hilda didn't even bother arguing for her son. "Totally." And Jonrad was somehow hyped for what would happen. "Should I feel sorry for him?" Glymet asked himself in a quiet mumbling. "Traveling to other realms is kind of his thing, Glym. John can handle himself." Hilda said while getting up. "Now, if you excuse me, Thor and Iden have been quiet for some time. I am afraid they're up to no good again." As she left, Glymet couldn't still drop the concerned face. "All right, if he's in there, I should at least be less worried about swims at night with him," Glymet said while massaging his temples. "Wait, your Argonian friend is over there as well?" Jonrad asked with wide eyes. "Yeah, he was the one who got taken with him." Glymet nodded. "This is bad." Alina held her chin. "What is?" Glymet turned to her with his heart almost jumping out of his chest. "John is in Clockwork City, and you have a friend missing over there as well." Jonrad showed concern too. "The problem with John is that he loses his marbles the moment he is surrounded by dwarven toys," meaning Alina explained. "He won't bother with anything, let alone swims at night." Jonrad confirmed. "All right." Glymet took a deep breath in and waited for a few seconds before continuing. "I need to get to Clockwork City." Alina and Jonrad looked at each other and thought for a while. "To be completely honest, I have no idea how to get there," Alina said. "Then get me in touch with Loneth," Glymet said. "I can't find her since after the attack." "She's camping with Master Nerina," Alina said. "Archmage Savos is badly wounded, so the two of them are looking after him. You need to go to the college and see Mirabelle Irvine to get in contact with Loneth." "Understand, thank you." Glymet thanked Alina and took a step backward. "I'll be off then." "Wait," Alina called. "Make sure to not bring up any word about John getting missing in Clockwork City in front of Master Nerina. She's a bit sensitive right now, and it may upset her hearing about John's situation." I remember," Glymet replied with an understanding face. "The adoptive mother, right?" "That she is." Jonrad nodded. "I'll be careful then." Part 2. It was unknown what situation the Archmage was in, but so long he is alive, things would be stable in the college for some time. His life was saved by John's artifact, and if not for it, he wouldn't be around. Nerina understood that, and wanted to thank him for saving her only surviving blood relative in the world. While Nerina and Savos aren't really getting along, she considers herself to be his elder sister of some sort, and he was family. Saving his life, no matter the cost, is a big deal to her. However, she didn't understand why John kept the info that Savos' life was threatened by her. His mind is still active. I can conjure some Daedric energy from Vermina's realm of quagmire to induce nightmares in his head and allow it to find its way during this coma. Loneth said. "The method is a bit radical, don't you think?" Nerina asked. "The Archmage is no simple man. If we give him a chance, he will easily push through it and fight his way back to us." Loneth said, "In my opinion, a coma is like a mental block, except that it actually blocks one's brain from his body. The senses still work, so we can give him just a little push." "I see. Let's hold on that idea for the night and see if there are any orthodox options on the table." Colette Marantz still hasn't shared her opinion with us. Restoration is a valid school of magic. Loneth tried to ease up the mood with an inside joke to the college. "It is indeed." Nerina appreciated the comment. "Well, it is all up to you in the end, Lady Nerina." "Thank you, Loneth. While it was all true, it wasn't ethical to do this to Savos. Inducing nightmares from Vermina's realm into his head will add variety to whatever is locking him in there and will probably pull him through this." But Nerina wasn't so heartless to let it happen. After all, Savos Aran has too many regrets to not be allowed to face. Some of these regrets were still fresh news to Nerina once Alina told her what happened in the Labyrinthian. The Labyrinthian was the place where the Staff of Magnus was being kept, and it is also a place where Archmage Shalater, the founder of Winterhold and its college, has set up a test for his successors as the Archmages of Winterhold. Usually, it is not a place that one can conquer on their own, or even as fast as Alina did, but she had all the toys John kept lying around in the Dare Tower, and had some help as well. Still, once in the past, Archmage Savos Aran attempted to challenge the Labyrinthian as well, and the result of his expedition wasn't all good. In Savos Aran's expedition, he had 5 masters of Winterhold with him: Atma, the Red Guard, Gurjun the Bossmare, Takes Light the Argonian, Hafner Icefist the Nord, and Elvali Varen the Dunmare, all of which were possible candidates for the seat of the Archmage, All but Savos got their souls trapped in the Labyrinthian, whereas he survived the fool's errand they called expedition and became the Archmage. The death of his friends weighed too much on Savo's soul to the point where he was committed to the college his whole life and never once thought about giving up the seat that he got by the sacrifice of his friends. He didn't truly conquer the Labyrinthian since he failed at the final test, but things would have turned out badly if it wasn't for him leading the College of Winterhold all this time. And so, Nerina didn't even know how to approach his coma, knowing that in his long sleep, Savos is somewhere he wants to be. But while she was contemplating, the door to the Archmage's chamber was opened, and Mirabelle Irvine walked in asking for Lonith. From how it seemed, Lonith had a guest, but while she was reluctant to meet him, Nerina urged her to do so. Still, from what Nerina could tell, it seemed like this man named Glymet was the one Lonith told her about. Her ex. As for Lonith, the Dunmare conjuration sorceress, she was thankful for Glymet's help during the fight against Encano while being a little bit on edge with him since the time they broke up. It wasn't that pretty how they ended up. Before they were an item, they were friends from the war and adventure companions for some time, but the situation with them being distant caused them to go their separate ways. Long-distance relationships hardly succeed to begin with, and Glymet has met someone else a few years ago. While Lonith doesn't know all the details, she knows that Glymet watched that someone die and it wasn't a peaceful death. Reminder, Alazan Derp, the former listener of the Dark Brotherhood from the story of John Rad and Glymet, the one John Rad killed in order to steer Glymet away from the path of Sidis. But for Glymet to come after this long time and ask to see her, she wasn't that excited to begin with until she met him. "Thank you for meeting me." Glymet spoke with his not meeting her save for a single second. GLYM. Lonith looked at him and noticed many things. So, like all humans, you became an old man so quickly. Older indeed, but not any wiser, I am afraid. He replied with an awkward smile. He has grown from the young man she met during the Great War to a late middle-aged man with white hairs lining the sides of his hair and his beard. Aside from that, some wrinkles and blemishes marked his face as someone who is almost 60. If he was like any of those clans who had giant blood or ancestral magic, he may have lived to an 80 or something before looking this old, but Glymet was just the epitome of regular humans. On the other hand, Lonith is well beyond 100 with the looks of a young woman in her 20s or 30s. Lonith, listen, he pushed all awkwardness aside and focused on the thing that matters. It's about swims. Swims. Lonith was surprised. What happened to the old lizard? Last time I checked on him, he was going around Winterhold. Lonith smiled vividly as she remembered their mutual troublemaker friend, Swims at night. He came to Winterhold? Glymet asked. Yes. He was here looking for a crew of adventurers, but Tyr showed up and ruined his whole thing. Classic Tyr, right? Lonith laughed as she remembered the situation from a month ago, but seeing how she immediately started laughing around Glymet, she was the one to feel awkward this time around. It has always been like this. She was always comfortable around him for some reason, and he was always distant and seeking something greater than himself. If he can just settle down and be. He has been taken, Glymet said. Who? Lonith became alert immediately. Swims? Yes. It happened when he came to find me in Dawnstar. Glymet then told Lonith a full account of what happened until now. Her reaction was to take in a few deep breaths and hold her head. A fight in the rift with an unknown arch-wizard, the ruins of Forelhost, which are forbidden even to approach, drinking magica, draining poison, fighting with John Dare over the Barilzer's mazed band. She repeated what she understood. And what on Nirn were you planning to find in Clockwork City? Oblivion. That's not even Nirn. To begin with, it is a different world altogether, a branch dimension. Just tell me that you know how to get there. Glymet asked patiently. Easy. You don't. Lonith replied. Barilzer's maze band is one thing, but that's a legendary thing, something unique, a backdoor of sorts. Lonith started to mumble at the end, as her head was getting some ideas at the moment. All right. Glymet waited for her to finish her thoughts. Look, I'll be honest. Lonith said, Barlizer was not just some ordinary wizard. He was a clockwork apostle who learned under Sothisil, then left him and went to Sir Vivek to gain access to real Dwemer technology. And what does that have to do with this? Glymet asked. I'm trying to say that if you want to do something Barlizer did with his maze band, you need someone on equal footing, if not greater than a genius like Barlizer. The only one I know of is Lord Divaith Fwire. That's impossible. Glymet laughed. Is he still alive? Who knows? Lady Narina and John Dare said that he is, but if it is Divaith Fwire, maybe it is some clone of his or whatever. That doesn't matter either way since he has multiple clone wives. Lonith said, Clone wives? Oblivion. Glymet couldn't imagine cloning oneself, to begin with, let alone cloning a wife of yourself. It is called self-cyst, but who are we to judge at this point? Lonith shrugged her shoulders. Either way, one of the clones happens to live just outside Winterhold. So, if not Divaith Fwire, we can just ask that female Divaith Fwire. He said, Yes. Lonith said, Lady Alf Fwire is her name. Just make sure you don't upset her. She can kill us with her mind, and we won't even know it. And so, Lonith and Glymet set out to meet with Alf Fwire for access to Clockwork City to save Swims at night, and possibly John Dare if he wanted any saving. Chapter 676, Alf's Bizarre Request. Chapter 676, Alf's Bizarre Request. Lonith and Glymet now had a target in mind, and it was none other than Alf Fwire, the first female clone of the great wizard Divaith Fwire. According to what Lonith knows, Alf Fwire lives not far from the Whispering Mines village, a mining town south of the city of Winterhold where a community of Dunmare folks lives in the shadow of the great shrine of Azura. As for Alf Fwire herself, she was living on a lone mountain not too far from the road, but Lonith made sure to make her presence known before walking into the den of the old sorceress. On the way up there, Lonith made sure to instruct Glymet that he must address Alf Fwire with absolute respect and show politeness in front of one of Tamriel's great sorceresses. This, however, would be best for her, rather than Glymet, to remember later on. Up the small mountain, a small wooden cottage was seen with a strange atmosphere covering its surroundings as if it wasn't in Winterhold, the land of ice and snow. Rather, this house wasn't surrounded by any snow and had a warm aura lingering around it to condition the temperature according to the wishes of the owner. And right at the front of the cottage, Alf Fwire was just crouching over a plant pot while toiling the soil inside with her bare hands, as if nothing was there to bother her. While Lonith and Glymet walked towards her, the two didn't speak, and Alf didn't even bother turning to face them. The awkward air looked only around Lonith and Glymet, as it seemed that Alf was quite enjoying herself by toiling the damp soil with her hands. After a few more relaxed breaths of air, Alf turned left and right as if looking for something, and right then, Glymet reacted and grabbed a nearby tray placed on a table where some sprouts were grown on a piece of cloth stained with some spice. He offered the tray to her, and she started to grab the sprouts slowly and place them one by one in a plant pot each. After doing that, she fixed the pots in places she seemed to have prepared earlier and calmly went ahead to whip her hand off the damp soil. Glymet smiled and looked at the small vegetable garden. Gardening? Really? Woman of your talents? He wondered. It's a simple life. The reply came as Alf's voice sounded calm and unbothered. She kept on with her day, not bothering a single bit about Lonith or Glymet. Moreover, she was now feeding the goats in her small barn. We have a request, Lady Alf. Lonith spoke with some hesitation. We met before. I work with Lady Narina. The girl. Alf slightly reacted, but she returned to her nonchalant attitude immediately. What was going on in the city yesterday? I was hearing noises. She was hearing noises? It is a fair 20 miles away from any form of civilization here, and the weather can barely afford one to barely see the shrine of Azura, let alone hearing Winterhold. And she was feeling it. An attack. Lonith replied, while suppressing her thoughts. A Thalmor agent tried to control a dangerous artifact called the Eye of Magnus and harmed many people in the process. Lady Narina and her second disciple, Alina, stopped it from escalating along with my friend here. Sounds like a shitty business, replied Alf in her cranky, old woman attitude and kept feeding the goats. If we may take a moment of your time, we want some advice regarding something quite dangerous. Lonith asked without minding Alf's attitude that was focused on her daily routine more than some worthless guests. Ah, Alf sighed with boredom. You live on the most frozen, god's-forsaken mountain on Nirn, and you think people will leave you alone. But still, you come knocking and asking questions. And for the first time, Alf actually turned to them. Fine, I'll hear it, she said. Lonith and Glymet looked at one another with hope. We've been meaning to travel to Clockwork City. We thought you would be our lead to it. Glymet spoke politely. And you ever thought about finding Barlizer's maze band before coming to bother me? You know, the only artifact on the face of Tamriel that could get you into Clockwork City? Alf asked. I witnessed it being used, so it is not available to me. He replied. Ah, Azura's curses. Alf sighed with even greater annoyance than before. But just now, she asked them to find a hidden artifact that is one of a kind and most likely hidden somewhere than to come, and ask her for help. It caused Glymet and Lonith to be a little bit weirded by Alf. And after a few seconds of consideration, Alf gave a reply. Fine, she said. Clockwork City, is it? Yes, I know the way. But it's not easy. I'll need the toe of a frost troll, a Dwemer puzzle box, and the skull of a living dragon. Find all that, and I'll help you. And as the two of them were already weirded once, Alf didn't give them a chance to cool down and made a bizarre request. Excuse me, why those ingredients exactly? Lonith asked suspiciously. An old woman living alone in a cottage with strange herbs, goats, and lots of magic. What am I? Alf asked. A retired lady wizard? Glymet answered while not so sure. A witch, Sarah, Alf replied with an attitude. I just gave you the ingredients a witch needs for your spell. Kids these days have no creativity whatsoever. Glymet didn't want to argue with Alf, but Lonith seemed to be having some doubts. A spell that needs a frost troll toe, a Dwemer puzzle box, and a skull of living dragon. She thought and asked, I understand the Dwemer puzzle box since it is Clockwork City and all, but why the frost troll toe? Same answer, a witch's recipe. Alf answered. And the skull of a living dragon? Glymet answered. I heard there is a Dragonborn around, so can we ask him? Don't involve the girl's boy. Alf said, if he gets involved, the dragon will be dead rather than alive. The girl, Nerina, the boy, John. Reluctantly, Lonith and Glymet descended the mountain where the cottage of Alfra the Witch was and started their journey by heading to Sarthel. There, they would gather some provisions and information before heading out to gather Alf's ingredients for her witch spell. Lonith made sure to ask for a frost troll toe in the alchemy shops and the Dare labs, but the harsh reality dictated that no one was even interested in troll toes to begin with. Toes are the least magical thing about a troll, and were mostly discarded along with most of a troll's carcass. As for the dwarven puzzle box, this thing was too precious, and no one would part with it since they are collector items that would fetch for a crazy amount of money. Lonith asked Alina in the Dare Tower, but according to her, John keeps all his Dwemer collection in his own storage cube, and Wolford dismantles it for work and analysis, so there was no way in that direction either. As for the skull of living dragon, John Dare had some dragon skeletons lying around in his domain, and they are materials of legendary quality and technically invaluable as magic ingredients, but Alf made sure to say a living dragon. This means that the dragon shouldn't be killed anywhere near the Dragonborn who is associated with John Dare. As for Glymet, he went through the inns of Sarthel and ended up in the Companion's outpost. Unlike Lonith, Glymet's tour was fruitful, and he got 3 much-needed things. A request to hunt a frost troll that was threatening the borders between Winterhold and the Pale, a location of a possible undiscovered Dwemer ruin, and a report about sighting a dragon near Mount Anther. With those 3 leads, Lonith and Glymet were closer to fulfilling their quest in no time. On the 4th day after the disappearance of John Dare and Swims at night, along with Messner and his mercenaries to Clockwork City, Lonith and Glymet headed out to search for those 3 ingredients in the snow wastes of Winterhold. Lonith conjured 2 flame Atronach horses for the 2 of them, and they traveled with ease during the day until they reached the location of a sightless pit. According to the reports Glymet acquired, this sightless pit leads to a dwarven ruin that remained undiscovered due to its entrance being very unconventional, and, as its name goes, the entrance was a sightless pit. Rumors also have it that the dwarven ruin beneath is probably infested with Falmer, which makes it twice as dangerous compared to any other dwarven ruin. Either way, the two of them went down there using levitation magic and remained undetected most of the time other than the occupational times where they had to kill some Falmer shamans to make sure they're not detected via any magical means. After a while, the two of them reached a dwarven workshop and found the Dwemer puzzle box they were after. They immediately left the sightless pit by levitating out and headed west in the barren frozen lands of Winterhold to the border with the Pale. At this point, the day was coming to its end, and the two of them started to look for a nearby settlement to spend the night. But as they did so, a snowstorm struck, and the two lost their sense of direction. And to make things even worse, the frost troll, which they were after, was tracking them down amidst the storm. It was very hard for the two of them to fight a troll in such weather since none of them was able to focus either on their footing or their magic. Glymet fought the troll a few times, and sent away each time, but the tenacious creature kept healing and coming. A troll's regeneration is a menace, and to the gorilla-like frost trolls that live in these lands, snowstorms are their ideal climate, so instead of being hunted, the troll was now the hunter, and it used attrition tactics against Glymet in order to wear him down. During this predicament, Glymet had a strange sensation and registered a few presences coming his way. Loneth was terrified by the fact that the two of them were now surrounded by a pack of snow wolves. In normal circumstances, Loneth would throw her spells left and right, but the storm completely shattered her concentration, so she can only do small spells and cantrips. All she can do is cast some self-enhancement spells to fight the wolves at close range. But for what things seemed to be, the wolves weren't eyeing them as prey, but they were actually being watched over by the wolves. "What is going on?" Loneth asked. Knowing the nature of the infamous wolves of Winterhold, they should be tearing anyone they see to shreds by now. Glymet had no answer for Loneth, no answer that would mean anything to her anyway. However, he seemed to have felt something and kept watching the wolves as they watched him. After a minute, the troll appeared from the storm once again and seemed to be aiming for Glymet with full momentum. But once the wolves saw the troll coming their way, they jumped at him in the most feral way possible. A fight broke out between the wolves and the troll, and they managed to overpower it with sheer numbers and usual wolf tactics. Once they distracted the troll from the front, they started attacking its legs and pushed it down. As it was completely under their mercy, they ripped it apart limb from limb until there was nothing left for him to regenerate and dragged the carcass away. And as if they were meaning for it, they left behind 1 foot of the troll and disappeared with the storm that didn't last long after. In this strange situation, Glymet understood that he once had done a good deed to a follower of the Lord of the Hunt. A few days ago in Rift Inn, he returned the beast ring to the old man whose son was cursed with lycanthropy, and this seemed to be a form of returning the favor. And with the troll toe in their possession, Glymet and Loneth left this frozen wasteland in order to find a way to get the last item on the list, the skull of a living dragon. And they got it. 3 days after fighting the troll in the snowstorm, Loneth and Glymet managed to defeat the dragon at Mount Anther with much difficulty. It wasn't impossible to defeat a dragon without being a Dragonborn. After all, Glymet had the skills needed for the job, but this beast was nothing like anything he ever met before. In terms of combat power, cunning, and danger, the dragon topped all games he hunts for, but Loneth seemed to have brought a bunch of master-level spell scrolls with her that leveled the ground with that dragon, allowing Glymet to land some strong hits with his sword, Goldbrand. Speaking of which, the legendary Goldbrand was known to be a sword forged on Akavir by the dragons, and it was meant to protect them. Never did it occur to Glymet that such a sword would be this lethal against the dragons. In fact, it was the key contributor in this fight, as it sliced against the dragon's scales like nothing else. If John was to discover that, he would offer a fortune to get his hand on this dragon-slaying weapon. And with that, Alf's 3 ingredients were gathered, and it was time to head back to the old, which in her cottage on top of the mountains south of Winterhold. However, once Alf saw the 3 items put in front of her, her expression was that of pure awe. "You got all those things? Oblivion, take me," Alf said, and arbitrarily waved around. "Well, leave them out back, I guess." "Wait, hold on. Lonith suddenly interrupted Alf, the one whom she told Glymet to be absolutely polite with. "You don't need them to get us into the city." To Lonith's question, Alf turned to her with a face void of expressions. "What? No." Alf denied it right away, as if it was way beneath her level to use such materials. "I just assumed the troll, the farmer, or the dragon would kill you like they did the other 3, and I wouldn't have to bother with whatever you wanted. But a deal's a deal." And just without any effort at all, Alf flicked her fingers for a portal to appear. One flick, one portal to Clockwork City, easy as that. "You damn woman." On the other hand, Lonith was staring at Alf with a head fuming with unspeakable things. "Lonith, let's go." On the other hand, Glymet held to Lonith's arm and held her from doing anything stupid. "You and I, old woman, we are not done." Lonith kept staring at Alf with an expression of rage, but just before she said anything more, Alf waved her hand and moved the portal at Glymet and Lonith in a second. The 2 of them disappeared as the portal was dispelled, sending them to Clockwork City, just like that. Now, where was I? The pasta frolla recipe. Here it is. Chapter 677, Clockwork Welcome. Chapter 677, Clockwork Welcome. In a realm where the sky was covered with layers of smog and blackness, and the land was infertile and barren so much so that puddles of oil would join around to create an endless swamp of grease and copper-colored garbage, a portal opened in the sky for 2 figures to fall through. The descent, which would be lethal to many, was negated by the fact that the 2 of them came into contact with a mound of garbage before tumbling down into the oil swamp beneath. Heads first fell, but Lonith was luckier than Glymet as she landed on top of him. He groaned, seemingly from the weight which pressed softly yet heavily on his chest. The view that he was blessed with, however, was splendid enough to let him forget about the pain for a second. But Glymet wasn't a man of deviant thinking like some other people. Moreover, as Lonith was practically his ex, it could get awkward and blatantly inappropriate to comment on such things. "You all right?" Lonith was self-aware, however, as she stood hurriedly to move her chest off his face. Her mind was somewhere far from the thoughts that plagued Glymet's, and she darted up immediately to check her surroundings. "The old hag." Lonith spoke in anger with gnashed teeth. "I can't believe she did this." To make it even worse, Lonith found her feet stuck in a grease pool, which made it all oily inside her boots. In one wave of anger, she screamed her rage out. Seeing a usually calm dark elf this frustrated, Glymet had to stand himself up and check on the situation while hoping that his dizzy head would fix its own soon. Teleporting wasn't his favorite magic, and his dizziness seemed not to be getting any better. Still, he can now confirm that the smell of the place they ended up in would make things worse. It was a dumpster, plain and simple. Mounds and mounds of metallic garbage could be seen everywhere, with the skyline being hazy and difficult to see through from the clouds of carbon wastes. In this polluted weather, all Glymet could see, apart from a sea of garbage, was the silhouette of a city in the direction that he assumed to be north. "Fuck." Lonith, on the other hand, was banging on a small crystal orb with her hand and shouting, "Work, you piece of shit. I don't think a crystal can connect you to anything in this place." Glymet spoke as he approached her. "This place doesn't seem friendly anyway." "You think I don't know that?" Lonith replied in a sharp tone as she turned to him. Her red dark elven eyes were brimming with pure anger, but the moment she looked at Glymet's face, she took a breath in and returned the crystal orb to her bag. "I am sorry, GLYM." She then apologized to her middle-aged human companion. He wasn't even concerned about her unusually sharp attitude, but if Lonith is worried about something, he is sure that he should be worried too. "Let's go find who we came here for." He spoke. "I don't think contacting anyone on Nirn would help at the moment anyway." But that hag, she just decided to throw us into another plane of existence and expect us to find our way back on our own. Loneth flared up again. She had us hunt a troll, delve into a farmer nest, and fight a dragon just to get rid of us while she could just send us here with a flick of her fingers. It's okay, Glymet sighed. I have a feeling we can handle it. She was still in a sulky mood, but with his words, she started to ease up a bit and follow him around. So, the Clockwork City, what should we expect? Glymet asked. By Azura and Dagon combined, what were you expecting when you aimed to come here with swims at night in the first place? She cried at him. Not to barge into this place right away and do some research first, obviously. Glymet replied as he felt offended by her action of jumping to conclusions. All we were planning to do is to get our hands on a mazed band and use it to travel here after we made our preparations. No one accounted for two archwizards to fight over the ring and swims getting dragged into it with them. Real smart, the two of you. Loneth laughed mockingly. You two were planning to come here for treasures and never even thought that after 200 years, this place would turn into one giant fucking dumpster. Glymet sighed and decided not to clash with Loneth before she calmed down. Instead, he dragged the conversation to talk about this plane of existence they are in, Clockwork City. Well, I'm sure you at least know this. Loneth went into a lecturing mode as she was struggling her way through the piles of sharp junk. Clockwork City is an artificial plane of existence. Officially, it is a subspace made by magic, but its owner, God King Sotha Sil, couldn't muster enough power to do something like Nirn, planet, which is a creation of the divines. So he made it that this subspace minimizes everything that comes into it, so it can contain way more space than what it physically should. So you're saying we've become miniature versions of ourselves? Glymet asked. Yep. Loneth nodded and pointed around her with both hands. Everything here you may perceive as normal-sized, but imagine it only being a fraction of its actual self. So, is the city itself on a physical plane then? Glymet asked. Is it on Mundus, mortal world, to begin with? Because even with the most complicated alteration spells, you can't keep such large space miniatured in such a stable state. Lore warning. Here's where things get exciting. Loneth became wholly engrossed in her explanations and forgot how angry she was. Sotha Sil created this realm as a metaphysical clockwork realm. What he meant to do was to replicate the mythic structures of Nirn as a metallic miniature. It supposedly exists outside space and time, but still in the physical world. It is represented in the form of a clockwork globe that is no larger than a large chamber and requires an individual to be magically shrunk to enter. Well, Glymet thought, none of this makes any sense. I know it is difficult to understand, but what are your thoughts? She asked. So it exists physically, but not in the same space and time. There is a physical representation of Clockwork City on Nirn, as you said, but it still isn't there. This means that we are on Nirn, but we aren't at the same time. Glymet started noting the conflicts of information. I know it may seem like this, but this whole place is a mystery. Loneth explained it the best she could. No, Glymet asked. Magic teaches us that there is an explanation to everything. While I am just a battle mage and not versed in scholarly magic like you are, I have a clear conviction that there is an explanation to this. Well, you do you, GLYM, Loneth said and smiled for the first time since meeting Glymet. Thanks for taking my mind off things, by the way. Glymet chuckled as he was caught. Don't mention it. Still, the two had their minds filled with questions after that conversation. So he spoke first. Yes. She turned to him. What about the Orbis universe itself? The tower and the wheel and all this? We are not out of it, right? He asked. The Clockwork City's exact location is shrouded in mystery, with the city itself being described as a metaphor made manifest. She said, That's somehow scary. He laughed in a worried voice. Yes, I agree. Loneth nodded, but she soon looked at the bright side of their ordeal. But it said Sotha Sil died 2 centuries ago. Still, the machines he built may still be active. I assure you this is going to be fun. Let's agree to disagree. Just as Glymet said those words, Lonith bumped into him as she wasn't looking ahead. Just before she was about to ask what was going on, she saw it with her own eyes. Machines. No, animals. Animals made machines, as if a mix of organic matter and metal. They looked sickening and totally monstrous, as if a mishmash of all sorts of humans, animals, and monsters was put together. Some bipedal, some quadrupedal, and some are even tripedal and pinnipedal. Once these things spotted Glymet and Lonith with their human/monster faces and multiple misplaced eyes, a moment of silence was exchanged before those things started shrieking madly. Asterisk screech. Star. Hundreds of unidentifiable monstrosities rushed madly from every possible angle. Some crawled even and some hopped disorderly. What they all had in common, however, were the fangs and teeth opened wide and aiming for the tender meat they just spotted. Immediately, Lonith set up a circle of protection, spell, and started to repel the waves of those mad creatures, while Glymet was sword in hand and spell in another, circling around Lonith and dropping down all the monsters in his way. The two of them were fast and efficient, but they were overwhelmed with sheer numbers. They had no place to retreat to, and the monsters seemed mindless with rage and hunger. Glymet was bitten a few times, and the bites of these creatures seemed acidic and poisonous. He had enough flame aura within him to overwhelm any foreign bodies that may try to harm his constitution, but he wasn't sure he would walk away from this fully unscathed. But just as he lost his focus, and a large monster jumped over him, a strange sound of explosion and metal clinking disoriented his senses as the monster that almost jumped him was torn apart and smote down with a thundering blast. Glymet and Lonith turned to where that sound came from, and up above a heap of garbage, a man stood tall with a strange cylinder object in his hand aimed towards them. The man raised his strange weapon up and lifted his goggles for his blue eyes to shine bright. The rest of his face was mostly covered in metal and cloth that was all in the color of rust, but there was a very distinctive red beard growing from the man's face and reaching down to his waist. "Ram, Coda, you're up." The man called in a clear but weary voice, and following his call, two more individuals appeared not too far from him. One of them held a menacing version of the weapon held by that man, and the other was holding a hammer and shield. The one holding the menacing-looking weapon just aimed it towards the monster surrounding Lonith, and a hail of projectiles was unleashed with the sound of booming thunder put in sequence. The weapon unleashed tens of projectiles every single second to the point where monsters were bursting into shreds all around the place. Still, that was to get rid of the monsters that aren't close enough to Lonith and Glymet. As for those which got too close to shoot with the Gatling cannon, the other figure slid down on the garbage heap, and as it got closer, its size was notably appearing to be that of a small creature. In fact, it appeared to be Argonian in origin with the size of a child. But once that one came close enough, something strange happened. The small Argonian was suddenly enlarged to a size that can't be called Argonian anymore. It became a behemoth, a hulking breed of the lizard-folk Argonian race with a burly body almost like a hybrid of a man and a dinosaur. Once that behemoth descended, something akin to a natural disaster occurred, and every moving thing aside from Glymet and Lonith was immediately crushed under his mighty shield and hammer. Ram and Coda are sponsored characters. In mere seconds, those monsters were no more. The one holding the Gatling cannon stopped firing with the last monster dropping, and the Argonian behemoth stopped his destruction as he looked closely at Lonith. The man that led them descended the garbage heap, and as he got closer, the other two stood behind him. The behemoth Argonian, the one known as Coda, started to shrink back to normal, which was the form of a short Argonian male, and the other one, known as Ram, wasn't even a living being, but rather an autonomous humanoid that is native to the Clockwork City, a factotum. A factotum wielding a Gatling cannon, and an Argonian that can shift into a behemoth. The red-bearded individual leading them should be just as great at the very least, if not far greater. He, who is wielding a spear-like weapon that can shoot at far distances, walked closer and revealed his face. He saw Lonith, and Lonith saw him. They recognized one another immediately. Even Glymet recognized him since they just met a few days ago on Nirn. Lonith? He asked, am I dreaming? John. She walked to him. Azura, what happened to you? He looked way beyond his age. It was as if he was no longer 21. His skin was badly withered, and his right eye was covered with an eye patch. He looked at empty space, and his expression found it hard to gather his thoughts. He wanted to speak, and his voice seemed tired and weary. It has been... John looked at his own hand and started counting. My God! Glymet couldn't believe what happened to young John and looked at Lonith, who was also looking at him. How long has it been? They didn't think about it at all. The time difference between realms. The reality phenomenons that cause temporal anomalies. The effects that time causes in the different parts of existence. The principle of the AKA, the time, and the formation of Auriel, Akatosh, and Alduin as the trinity that outlines time in the mortal realm, Mundus, and separates it from the alien realms of Oblivion and Aetherius. It was all too shocking for them to. 5 days. John finished counting. All right, we're done here. Chapter 678, Clockwork Dream. Chapter 678, Clockwork Dream. After the rough arrival at Clockwork City and running first into John Dare and his 2 new companions, Coda and Ram, Glymet and Lonith were led by the 3 to a place of hiding where John referred to as his toy house. Amazing, isn't it? John spoke as he pridefully showed off his part of the dumpster. It is decent, as little as decent goes, Lonith said as she walked past them and found a piece of furniture that looked soft enough to lay on. Azura, I'm all beat up. Refreshment. At this point, the factotum, which is one of John's companions, approached Lonith with a canister in his hand. His voice was what can be expected from a robotic being, except for the fact that it sounded young, too young to be anyone mature, but more like the voice of a child despite its adult-sized body. Is that water? While trying to hide her thoughts about that factotum, Lonith looked closely at the canister and seemed agreeable. I can use some water. Oh, the factotum, however, became disappointed all of a sudden. It didn't mean anything. And he moved away. I said I would drink water. Lonith was somewhat taken aback by the behavior of the automaton. Oh, that's not water. John interfered in their conversation at that point while he was offloading the monster bodies off the cart that was being pulled by Coda. It is not. Lonith frowned. Yeah, there is no running water in Clockwork City, not in this area at least. John said, Ram here thinks that everyone and everything must get oiled thoroughly for their limbs to keep functioning. He almost poured some in Coda's mouth when he was asleep. That's unfortunate. At this point, Glymet participated in the conversation as well. So, you're John Hill, son of Johnrad, the one I heard so much about. Glymet offered a handshake. And you're Glymet, my father's friend. John replied and returned the handshake. For the first time, I'm not disappointed in a friend of my father. You sound just like him. Glymet laughed. Nope. Now I'm totally disappointed. John looked away and withdrew his hand. Hey, John. You said you were here for 5 days, right? Where is Swims at night? The Argonian that arrived here with you. Lonith asked. John threw another monster on the ground and helped Coda pull the cart away before returning to Lonith. Large for an Argonian, crafty, deep voice like to steal things? John asked. That's him. Lonith and Glymet replied. Sadly, he is held captive by Messner and his goons. John said with a long sigh. You didn't free him? Glymet asked. Aside from being immersed in research and scouting the city, the place around the Brass Fortress, I haven't achieved much. John replied with a regrettable tone in his voice as he took off his gloves and his helmet. Everything in his surroundings was made of scrap, and the situation he seemed to be in wasn't what to be expected of the usual John Dare. John, what happened during the past 5 days? Glymet asked. Now that they started to head down with questioning in this direction, John seemed a little bit annoyed and dejected. Messner was right, John said. About. Lonith sat straight and asked. I had met Messner 3 times before. We always ended up fighting. John said, Back then, he told me that because I am in Skyrim, my turf, he couldn't really do much against me. But now I am in his playground. He defeated you? Loneth asked. What? No. I kicked his ass for the 4th time, just all right. John said with total ease. The problem now is that he is hiding in the brass fortress where I can't reach him. I tried to invade the place twice, but I couldn't even scratch the defense of that thing. That doesn't seem like it is all that is troubling you. Glymet said. Yeah. I don't know what it is or how he does it, but I suspect that Sothis Sil has left behind some beefy defense system in the city. Not only can it stop me from breaching the fortress, but it is also keeping an eye on my movements and keeps overheating the magicka around me. How is that? Glymet asked. It is like instead of walking on normal ground, one is walking in a deep pit of tar. Loneth said, I've read about the applications of magicka heat wave attacks. Very annoying. John sighed. But it's all good and dandy out here. My boys Coda and Ram are here with me, and we're having fun tinkering things around. John pointed around his garbage dumpster, which looked like a scrapyard, and a workshop where he had tons of machines and monsters lying around. Everything looked like a mess, but just in the middle of it all, it seemed that John had constructed a cottage from scrap which looked annoyingly similar to the cottage of Alf Fyr, the grand sorceress that sent Glymet and Loneth here. Those things, Glymet spoke while he was focused on the monsters that John just offloaded. They're the makings of Sothis Sil. What? The abominations? Come on, of course not. John denied that as if it was the most obvious thing. Abominations? Loneth reacted. Never heard about that. There is no mention of them in the books. Because that's the name I gave them, John replied. And the reason they never appear in any book is that they only started appearing 4 days ago. Meaning? She asked. When I arrived here, Messner was already setting his plans in motion, and in order to keep me from getting to him, he is sending hordes and hordes of those abominations. John replied. But these things, some of them look like people. Glymet noted. That's because they are, John couldn't help but shake his head with regret. Messner is using people in this sickening thing? Loneth asked with a horrified face. Yes, they are a byproduct of machinery and biological alchemy. He made living people into this. But John halted his words and approached one of the tripedal corpses before making a cut over its chest and extracting something from inside. No way. Glymet and Loneth were even more freaked out now. Yes, black soul gems. John nodded. The only type of soul gems that can harvest the living souls of humans, elves, and beast folk, the black soul gem. It means that every abomination they took down was fueled and powered by someone's life. Just an hour ago, they had put down around 100 of them. For 100 to be made, 100 souls had to be killed. Messner is killing the people who live in the brass fortress. There's a population of a few thousand over there, and they're the last of Sothis Sil's worshippers who survived for the past 200 years after his death. John explained, first, he started with the ones that lived outside the fortress. They were nomads known as the Tarnished. Once he killed most of them, he invaded the city via secret routes. Among those Tarnished, I was only able to save Coda over there. John said, while pointing at the small-bodied Argonian that was ripping the black soul gems of the abomination's chests. Isn't he just a child to be doing that kind of thing? Loneth asked. A child? John was taken aback. No, he's weird, even by my standards. That tells a lot. I'm not sure about his age, but he is surely an adult. He's just a midget. As for his other mood swings, he can be very different with each form. John explained. How so? Well, he can be different, as if having many personas depending on what he does. Coda is kind of goofy, but he's the one that talks to other people. There is this cranky person that he has when I give him a task, and another persona that comes up when he tastes liquor. It is all a dissociative identity disorder, but I seem to have made it worse when I gave him my blood once. You gave him? Loneth halted for a while, looking at John with narrowed eyes. She's one of the few who are aware of John's secret as a Dragonborn, and with Glymet present, she was acting a bit weirded by how John would just give his dragon blood away. He was bleeding out. That's how I saved him. After doing so, He started to have this persona called Dragon that suddenly makes him like a big behemoth. Weird, right? But it seemed John didn't take a hint and kept explaining. Glad to see the son has taken after his dad's dragon obsession. Glymet laughed from the side while commenting on John's statement about causing Coda's dragon persona by his blood. I know, right? John took it for a laugh, but speaking of children, that guy over there is certainly a child. John then pointed at Ram, the factotum that was standing ideally while doing nothing. The automaton. Glymet looked closer at Ram. Yeah, weird story actually. I was exploring the surrounding area on my second day, and I stumbled on a place crawling with abominations. It seemed to be the first location of Messenger hit. Over there, I found a factotum that was out of service, and it wasn't powered by any soul gem whatsoever. There wasn't even a place to insert one, but all I found on him was a memory crystal. What for? Loneth asked. Here's the crazy part. John got closer to Loneth and Glymet. Memory crystals can contain memories of the past, but that one carried something I couldn't fathom, to be honest. Once I fixed the factotum's power circuit, it started behaving and speaking in a weird language. I had to polish my Dunmery, Dark Elvish, just a little bit, and he was speaking a very old dialect for Vardenfell. And, for what I could gather, he is the son of an important person. He was diagnosed with a rare condition and was dying, so his father called upon a friend of his, whose name was Sotha Sil, to save the child. Sotha Sil managed to back up the child's psyche on a memory crystal. There was no record on the crystal that it was activated before I powered it, but when we first spoke, Ram told me something very, very strange. Don't keep dragging. Loneth beckoned John to keep going. He told me that his kind is at war with my kind, and he will ask his father to spare and reward me if I take him to his home city at Vardenfell. Hold on. Loneth called for a timeout. This doesn't mean, wait. Give me time to catch up. She seemed totally freaked out about what she just heard while Glymet was slowly trying to pick up the pace behind her. So, you're saying that the psyche in the automaton belongs to a child from the dwarves? The race that went extinct. Shush. Both John and Loneth shushed Glymet. Oh, Glymet realized that Ram is not aware of the fact that the Dwemer, commonly known as the dwarves or the deep elves, are no longer in this world. Plus, it wasn't just the Dwemer that were at war with the Nords at that time. There was also the Chimer. John said, that's two races that have gone extinct. Glymet whispers. Much like the Dwemer, the Chimer lived above the lands of Vardenfell and were commonly known as the Changed Elves. Unlike the Dwemer that poofed out of existence during the war with the Nords at the Red Mountain Vardenfell, the Chimer changed their worship from the Trinity of Azura, Bothia, and Mephala to the Tribunal of Almalexia, Sotha Sil, and Vivek. This led them to be cursed by Azura for their skin to become gray and their eyes to become red, which are the characteristics of today's Dunmer, the Dark Elves, the people of Loneth. So whether Ram is a Dwemer or a Chimer remains uncertain. Why can't you guess whether he was a Dwemer or a Chimer? Glymet asked. Language barrier. I can cast linguistic comprehension on a human or a book, but not on a complex machine like that. John replied. This is shocking, Glymet said and let out a sigh. Sadly, this problem will be on your hands. We're here for swims at night, and once we're done, we'll scurry our way out of this place. I suggest that you come with us when we find him. That will be more complicated than you think. John sighed with a tired face. There's a reason why people can't simply teleport in and out of this place. It is another realm, we get that. Loneth said, if it was only that simple. John laughed. You know what Clockwork City is, right? Both Loneth and Glymet nodded. Earlier before they met John, Loneth explained to Glymet that this doesn't exist in the same time and place as Nirn, but still exists within the physical reality. Still, it is known as a metaphysical world or a metaphor made reality. If that's the limit of your knowledge, then you simply lack understanding. John said, you need to know what this world is so that you can understand how to navigate it. All right. We're listening. Glymet sat down beside Loneth. First, there's a theory about the stability of reality. Simply think of it as if worlds branch from one another, A branch world is less real than a real world, but it is still real nonetheless. While we can't imagine grades for the word real, or how one thing can be more real than another, you can simply imagine it like the difference between reality and dreaming. We can't imagine how a world from a dream can be real, but if it ever is, it would be branched from the world of the dreamer. This also doesn't rule out the fact that a dream can happen inside a dream, so on and so forth. What we need to understand is that each branch world depends on its origin world to anchor it to its own reality. So that's what Clockwork City is. Glymet asked while being bored with the explanation. I don't know, John replied. It is just a theory that we have no evidence for. But Clockwork City has a physical anchor to Nern rather than just some dreamlike state of imagining or whatever, maybe an artificial dreaming machine or whatever. You mean the Clockwork Globe, the device that was thought to contain this city? Loneth asked. Correct. John nodded. The Clockwork Globe is a physical representation of Clockwork City that exists within Set's vault under the city of Mournhold in Morrowind. No one knows what the globe does, but John had a theory. Say, we know that to enter Clockwork City, one must be scaled to a very small size in order to physically access it, but what if that was falsified by the ignorance of the masses and minor misconceptions? Say, rather than being minimized, we were turned into information. John said with a mad glint in his eyes. I'm sorry, what? Loneth narrowed her eyes and had an urge to reboot her head. A metaphor made reality, a metaphysical world, not existing in the same time and space as Nern, but still within the physical boundaries. John rechecked the facts with Loneth once again and outlined his conclusion. We are not inside anything, Loneth. We are inside a world that was made inside an enchantment of a clockwork machine. Just lines of magical script. Loneth, a simulation of a world. John's smile grew with his excitement at the expense of Loneth's sanity as she could see what he was seeing for the first time. Loneth, we were digitized. Tron series? Digimon? Anyone from the golden days? Chapter 679, Clockwork Scheme. Chapter 679, Clockwork Scheme. Don't rent an apartment, they said. Get your own apartment, they said. Well, guess who wasted an entire week pumping money into a black hole of an apartment? The Clockwork City, also known as Sothis Sil, much like its sister cities of Vivec, City of Vivec, and Almalexia, Mournhold, is but a mere shadow of its former self. 200 years ago, the god kings of Morrowind, the tribunal of Almalexia, Sothis Sil, and Vivec lost their divinity which they maintained through yearly pilgrimage to the heart of Lorkhan, deep in the Red Mountain. While they drew divine power from the heart and achieved the status of living divines or demigods, for thousands of years, they were outdone by an old enemy from an age forgotten, Dagoth Uar. Just like them, Dagoth Uar drew power from the heart, ambushed them on their yearly pilgrimage, and would have annihilated the three of them if not for the cunning of Sothis Sil. Eventually, the three living divines lost their power gradually and were immensely weakened compared to their former selves, while they still held very considerable power as mortals. The incident with Dagoth Uar was resolved by the Nerevarine, who liberated the heart of Lorkhan from the Red Mountain, and by that, he defeated Dagoth Uar and ended the rule of the tribunal. Driven mad by the loss of divinity, Almalexia sought to destroy every divine presence in Morrowind and to install herself as the one true goddess. She attacked the weakened Sothis Sil and killed him in Clockwork City. Then she used his machines to wreak havoc in Mournhold, before accusing him of treachery and sending the Nerevarine on a false trail to get rid of him as well. Her plan eventually failed, and she was slain by the recreation of her husband, the Nerevarine, whom she betrayed and killed long ago. But in the end, all of that brought ruin to the once beautiful and glamorous Clockwork City. Nowadays, Clockwork City as a realm has remained barren and drained for around 200 years, while completely isolated from the outside world since the divinity of Sothis Sil, which powered the city, is no longer there. This place has taken the theme of steampunk to a completely new meaning, as everything in this city was made of metal, powered by steam pipes, and requires coal and oil. The main city isn't called Clockwork City, since it is the name of the entire realm, but its functional name is the Brass Fortress, a metropolitan area that holds tall spires, towers, domes, walls, and roads that were all made of metal with the color of brass. There were even brass highways connecting the city to other outside facilities and holding together a monorail network. Factories and refineries dotted the wilderness outside the Brass Fortress to form a great display of industrial prowess. As for vegetation and actual wilderness, the Badlands outside were known as the Radius, a mix of brass deserts, swamplands, and forests, most of which have died after the death of Sothasil due to the lack of vitality in this isolated world. Even if it is a digital world, it needs energy to stay alive. Aside from the Brass Fortress and the Radius, the only remaining location was the core of this world, which remains a mystery and certainly can only be accessed from the Brass Fortress that John can't enter right now because of the defense mechanisms that are solely set up to get in his way. On one hand, it may sound like trouble for him, but on the other hand, he can already see his way around it. John's eyes were fixated on Goldbrand for some time, the sword that was dangling from Glymit's side. Even as a Dragonborn, he felt threatened by that sword, the sword that was made to protect the dragons, a sword that can be made into the greatest weapon against dragons. John! John! While he was focused on his own thoughts, Lonith started calling for him. Huh? John turned to her, a bit dazed. Don't hum me. I was telling you about my plan. She said, Nah, I was just thinking about what you told me regarding Winterhold and the Eye of Magnus. John replied, We talked about that a few hours ago. Lonith said with narrowed eyes, Were you even listening to what I said to begin with? The plan, yes. John said and looked at the map Lonith was drawing with ink. Whatever it is, it's a bad plan. Fine. Show me what you got then. Lonith retreated from the table inside the scrap cottage and started looking at John with sharp eyes, as she didn't like being ignored. All right, everyone, a planned meeting. John clapped his hands and called for the people around. Glymit, who was maintaining his blade, joined them first, while Ram stopped tinkering with some machines and Coda got down off his guard tower, and the two of them came after Glymit. Gentlemen, lady, I hope you all took your time adjusting. Each of us has a problem on our hands, and cooperation is a must. For that to happen, we should review our problems in proper order and set primary objectives to solve accordingly. John said, But we're only here to find swims. Glymit said, It's all right, old man, everyone is out here for something. But as you find your friend, you need to get back to Tamriel. Those are two problems you have to solve with only Lonith and you if you don't wish to cooperate. John explained. Fine. What do you want? Glymit asked. I want Messenger. He hurt one of my people, and I swore to get him. John said. And those two? Lonith asked, pointing at Coda and Ram. Coda wants revenge. The midget Argonian Coda spoke his mind in his weird and funny accent. Bad people ambushed and killed the Tarnished. They killed Coda's father and kidnapped his sister. A quest for vengeance. John patted Coda on the back. You may be the first Argonian I actually come to like. Sigh. Meanwhile, Ram shook his mechanical head. And you, what about you? Glymit asked Ram. With uncertainty, Ram looked among his odd companions that were forced upon him due to circumstances and couldn't help but feel like lost? Was that the right term? He thought. According to the man who booted him into this world, the Nord called John, it is nothing but ruin where they are now, and their home realm, Tamriel continent, is far away from where this is. His people and his family shouldn't be in this world they are in, and since John stated that this is a world made by Sothasil, the only words Ram could actually remember, he realized that a long time has really passed. As for his memories, Ram barely had any. He has a memory crystal in this robotic body of his. It is too ancient but somehow still readable. His ego exists within it, and he can recall things well, but it seems that something has blocked access to the rest of his memories. Even the name he is going with now is a name given to him by John. Robotic artillery machine, he calls him, since he fixed his head on the body of a combat factotum, a sort of irony from a man who is from the enemy camp to his family. But according to John, after he ran a test on Ram's head, there's a missing piece in the head that may work as a signal receiver. Whatever signal it may receive, it may hold something vital for Ram. That's what he wanted. Signal. Ram replied at Glymet and pointed towards his head. While his actions seemed void of expressions on his metallic face, the fact that Ram wasn't good with the language of those strange people made him uncomfortable beyond sense and awkward at the same time, so he didn't try to do or say anymore. He is looking for some sort of communication chip that can be inserted into his head for him to bypass some restrictions on his current information access from his memory crystal and to complete his ego construct. John explained in full academic detail. All right, Glymet nodded with patience. 2 of us want to save a friend. 2 of us want to kill the man who controls the city and have our friend. And 1 of us is looking for whatever that signal or chip is. He then thought for a few seconds. I see most of our goals aligning together. We also won't be able to escape this world with Messner doing what he's doing, and the way out is probably somewhere deep in the Brass Fortress. John added, I'm afraid I am tending to agree. Loneth said, most of the records mention that all those who arrive at Clockwork City first arrive at the Brass Fortress. And those who leave, John asked, you'd be surprised how many people never talk about leaving this realm. Loneth said, all right. John started tabbing with his fingers on the central table in between, while thinking before sharing his thoughts. I have put together a plan and was going to execute it with the help of Coda and Ram, but now that you are here, things are looking better. Fine, let's hear it. Loneth said, with her experiences with John, she is aware that John isn't the strategic type, and he leaves most of the planning to his wife, Alina, but in terms of guerrilla tactics and stealth combat, John is a menace to contend with, a master of sabotage and destruction. 200 years after the death of Sothis Sil, Clockwork City started dying. However, it still functions thanks to what we think of as an emergency power supply. That thing is focused only in the region of the Brass Fortress. John said, and pointed at the map drawn by Loneth, but it was a small one she drew to fit on a notebook page, and so he asked for help. Ram the map. Just like that, Ram took his mechanical head off his mechanical body and placed it on the table. From a crystal on his forehead, a bright light was cast on the opposite wall and displayed a map of the entire city. You had me draw a map for an hour, and you have that. Loneth looked at John with unbelieving eyes. I had you do nothing, sweetheart. John replied with a mocking expression, admitting on the spot that he left her to draw a map on purpose. So, that's the Brass Fortress. John pointed at the upper half of the map. It is being powered by its own emergency generator while the rest of the realm has mostly died out. We are in the Badlands of Death, so to speak. To enter that city, we must bypass its defenses, and to do so, we need to cut the power from the city or lower it by a little bit. Isn't it dangerous for the realm? Loneth asked. If we hit the emergency generator, this whole reality may collapse. You must remember that this existence relies on that power for this climate to be livable. Barely livable, I must correct you. The air and the water in this realm should have expired long ago. It seems that the ingenious apostles of the Clockwork City have found ways to produce air and water for themselves inside the Brass Fortress, but out here, the pollution and the acid rain are simply disastrous. John explained, then put on his famous mischievous smile. From that point where I will hit their city. John manipulated the map and focused on the area outside the Brass Fortress, the radius. We are here in the southernmost part of the radius. This used to be a camp for the nomadic Tarnish people, and where I found Coda, his village in a way. John said. The others looked around the heap of scrap and could tell that there were more heaps of scrap here, but it was hard to deduce if any sort of fighting had happened in the area, since it is all just one big scrapyard. This place we are in was known as the Pavilion of Artifice. It used to be a crafting site, and I managed to build some nice tools here. John pointed at this rifle and eye patch that were just for a cool post-apocalyptic steampunk theme. As for now, this place is our hideout. I've set up a small formation to hide me here, so that Messner can't spy on me. If I ever leave or do anything around this realm, he will know it, and he will ruin it for me, since he knows his way better. So you're going to rely on us? Glymet asked. Bingo. Messner is afraid of me, and I had Ram and Coda help me, but now things will get twice as fast. John said, there are a few locations we need to hit. The first is the ventral terminus to the far west, an old facility that seemed ruined for ages, but it has a massive power supply input requirement. If you go there and direct that power to me here in the pavilion, I'll start working on some serious toys to charge at the city. What is the second location? Lonith asked. To the east, there's a big-ass facility called the Halls of Regulation. It is the other facility that requires large power input to function. It is actually for a good cause, since that facility produces breathable air and drinkable water for the entire realm. A win-win for everyone, since my water reserve is running low and I can really use a shower and a shave. My beard can grow a full inch every day, and by powering those two facilities, we can lower the shield on the city. Glymet asked, lower it enough for an attack to threaten them, and while doing so, Messner and his minions will come out, and we're going to hit them where it hurts. John said while performing a swift right hook. No tactics, diversions, backup? Lonith asked. I don't think we can face Messner's force head-on, since we are only 5, and I can barely leave this place unless there is a big distraction enough for Messner to focus on something else other than me. And the risk of this plan? Glymet asked. You go hard or you go home. Except that you can't go home. You get what I'm saying? John said, I trust in your skills, so I know you guys won't face much trouble if you take things with proper preparations. Fine, Glymet said. It pains me that both father and son have no head for strategy. Just because you know my ugly-ass father doesn't mean you get to compare us as you please. John shouted at Glymet with irritation. As John turned and walked away, Glymet looked at Lonith. You don't think he and his father can be mistaken for twins? He asked. Don't let them catch you saying that. She replied with an obvious shudder. Aside from the similarities between father and son, Glymet kept watching John just as carefully as John watched him earlier. If John the Elder and John the Younger, father and son, had so many similarities in appearance, Glymet managed to sense something that would set the two apart greatly. Much like himself, John Dare has a sensation of fate looming around him, in his actions, in his temperaments. He feels like a force of nature, free and driven, just like how Glymet was in the past. Paragons, heroes, monsters, this is the same sensation of fate which they read on one another. Two heroes in one action. While it sounds like nothing may stop them, it was also something morbid to one of them. Just a reminder, Glymet is the protagonist from the Elder Scrolls, Legend Story Mode, the Forgotten Hero. He is a human with an ambiguous race, and his name is derived from the Norwegian word glemt, which means forgotten, according to Google Translate. Chapter 680, Clockwork Sabotage. Chapter 680, Clockwork Sabotage. According to John Dare, Clockwork City has been working on emergency power for 200 years, and it is barely enough for the Brass Fortress, the main settlement of this realm, to maintain itself by producing fresh air and clean water. But once the outside facilities, such as the Halls of Regulation and the Ventral Terminus, were to be rebooted and start drawing power from the Brass Fortress, its automated defenses would automatically crumble. This will give John, Glymet, Lonith, Coda, and Ram the opportunity to strike Messner and rescue Swims at night together. But until those two facilities are put on the power grid, John shall stay behind in the hideout, tinkering through the next phase of his plan, while the others head out and visit these two locations, starting with the Ventral Terminus. From its name, the Ventral Terminus was a place that had a central data terminal that controlled a lot of facilities in the Clockwork City. It has been a long while since these functions have been moved to a location deep within a Brass Fortress, but still, many power and steam lines run through that place. Once Lonith stepped into the place, she received a warning from Ram. Traps ahead. Ram spoke in a cold mechanical voice. Traps. Curses. Traps. Hateful. Meanwhile, Coda was agitated by the mention of the word. Those two are certainly odd. Glymet commented on the cold behavior of Ram and the hectic personality shifts of Coda. All who befriended John Dare can't be called anything less than odd, Lonith said, while working her magic in the place to find the said traps. I got along with him just fine, and I'm pretty normal, Glymet said. These words made Lonith halt what she was doing, look back at him, sigh while shaking her head, and continue looking for traps. What? He asked. You're just as odd as he is, Lonith said, and kept going forward. Excuse me, Glymet was taken aback. I am but a vagrant, a self-taught mage, and probably the poorest man that ever walked on Tamriel. A vagrant who is welcome in every court of power in the Empire and Hammerfell. A self-taught mage who is on par with an archwizard in power, and a poor person who owns some of the most sought artifacts on Tamriel. Lonith repeated what Glymet is to Glymet. The only difference between you and John is how little you have to lose compared to what he sticks his neck out to protect. Glymet didn't even try to enter an argument with her, and had a few thoughts running in his head. One of them was so I don't lose more than what I did, and the other because I can't bear to lose you too, and the other, and the other. He didn't speak any of them, though. He even managed to stop himself from thinking and focus on the destination they were on. While the silence continued only to be interrupted by Ram's occasional warnings, the group found themselves getting surrounded by what seemed to be the strange and small dinosaur-like creatures that run on two legs. Their screams were horrific, and their razor-like lines of teeth were the first thing to be seen from them just before they chomped someone's head off. Clanfear. Lonith recognized the stealthy creatures immediately as a Dedralogist and made sure to teleport her party out of the ambush site at once. Once that was done, her three companions went into battle mode almost instantly. Glymet was the fastest to react, and with Goldbrand in his hand, he bounced forwards in a frenzy of hack and slash, as if he was letting go of something stressful in his head. On the other hand, the small-bodied Coda banged his warhammer on the ground and shouted, "It's time to wake the fuck up." In another shift of personality, Coda's body started to reform up close to Lonith, who watched the transformation earnestly. In a few seconds, the small, cute Argonian young man, who was already weirder than anything, became larger than any Argonian of his kin and bullier than a Daedric Runak. Runiacs are newly added Daedra in ESO. They look like Maroon's Dagon from Oblivion, but only above human size, and look super ugly, like seriously super ugly. Coda moved in an unstoppable momentum and pushed through the Clanfear horde with brutish strength and violent attacks, to the point where these pests were actually running from his roars. All of that occurred while Lonith and Ram were just watching from the back. Just as Lonith turned to Ram to see why he wasn't participating, he seemed to be disapproving of something. Chaotic and unhashtag in dollar at asterisk. What? She frowned. MHM. Ram turned to her with a questioning voice. The last word you said. Unhashtag in dollar at asterisk. I don't understand it. Is it ancient Velothi or Dwemery? She asked. Ram seemed unresponsive to her questions or unable to answer. She couldn't figure out which of the two, as he had no expressions to read on his robotic face and his body language was non-existent. Seriously, just how did John figure out information about you? Lonith asked in a frustrated tone as she wasn't able to crack the puzzle that is Ram in front of her. As the fight was over and the two fighting combatants returned to normal, the party proceeded smoothly until they reached a chamber that had a lot of valves, levers, and some control crystals. It took Lonith fairly 2 hours to see which goes where until she could boot up the facility once again. But once that happened, a crisis struck as the room was suddenly invaded by black smoke and intense heat. The four immediately started running all the way up to the safety of the outside surface. The ventral terminus was now functional according to Lonith's analysis, and she used a telepathic spell to contact John and tell him that everything worked out. He had a rough idea of their success, since he was watching the large chimneys of the Vale of Tears as they started to release black smoke everywhere. Now that those pillars of smoke were visible to the brass fortress, it meant that a strong force of mechanical abominations was on its way. They will come to investigate the Vale of Tears first, then they will rush to the ventral terminus to shut it down. Here's where John comes to play. Human, they are closing. As John was tinkering with his biggest toy so far, a black cat jumped on his back and walked up to his head as he was bending down while working. Yes, I've been ready for this for some time now, John said with a maniac smile. You sure you won't hit the other people? The black cat asked. Nefertiti, my darling, do I look like an amateur? He asked the cat as he stood up and carried her in his arms. Other than magic and food, you make every other thing explode these days, she said. Oh, someone's a bit cranky. John laughed while messing up her fur as she started to bite him in response. That's how things work, dearie. They either be eaten, be cast like magic, or be gone with a boom. John pointed at his latest creation and waited for it to boom, but it didn't boom. I said boom, John shouted with the same level of enthusiasm. Voice command activated. Boom sequence initiated. As the machine started speaking in a mechanical voice, John's grin became wider and wider. Kitty cat, it is time. You really have to do this? Nefertiti asked in a moment of hesitation. We can't use magic, remember? Bombardment is our next best option. John gazed at his creation with marvel and looked at many other replicas that he was working on in this pile of junk. They all had one of two shapes, either a big tube or a large box. At this moment, only John knew what these things do. I have gathered the best toys I could from Sothasil's vault and remodeled them to my heart's content. The face Messenger will be making is going to be priceless, John said and laughed with a sick grin. As for now, we should start taking over the Vale of Tears. John started lining all the large tube-like objects together and personally climbed into one of them along with his trusty rifle and his trusty kitty cat. Are they there yet? John asked. They're starting to swarm the place, Nefertiti replied. Then we must go. Fire the guns. Firing in 3, 2, 1, boom. Woohoo! And from all the mortar cannons John was working on the last few days, he was fired alongside many makeshift mortar shells towards the Vale of Tears, where Messenger's abomination force was located. He aimed to destroy Messenger's response force and get to the power grid that reached that location. Away from John and his maniac bombarding, Glymet and the rest were watching over the facility known as the Halls of Regulation, just south to the Mire Mechanica swamps and the Brass Fortress. Unlike the ventral terminus, the Halls of Regulation are much larger and were actively guarded by factotums and fabricants. While the factotums are the mechanical guardians of Clockwork City, the fabricants are its fauna of animals and beasts. They are part mechanical and part animal, but unlike Messenger's abominations, the fabricants are almost identical to normal animals that have some prosthetic limbs and exoskeletons attached to them. In some sense, the difference between a clockwork fabricant and a clockwork abomination is much like the difference between a normal animal and a patchwork chimera. So these are the creatures of Sothasil. Glymet spoke in wonder. I see there's a sense to them that I find it brilliant. At least there is one thing in this dumb that is half decent, Loneth replied. Then again, I have never expected in my life to say that about Clockwork City, but I hate it here. You do? Glymet asked. Green meadows, snowy peaks, ashlands, that's my thing. Not this. Loneth replied with a lot of complaining in her tone. Glymet was surprised that Loneth hated this place which he finds, despite all its junk and oily smell, very fascinating. While the two of them wouldn't disagree on a lot of things, Glymet wanted to express that he is fond of this alien realm, but not before Ram and Coda approached them. Reconnaissance complete. Ram spoke the wholest sentence he said for the day. How many are there? Loneth asked. Aliaminculi, outside, 12. Inside, none. Ram replied. But that question seemed to have rubbed Coda the wrong way. It is no secret that the factotums have been one of Sothasil's most wondrous creations, but the Halls of Regulations has its own automated system and mounted turrets that can muster a defense heavier than that of the Brass Fortress itself. Blah, blah, blah. Known as the lifeline of the entire Clockwork City, this facility was established to last despite its current quietness, blah, blah, blah. 1,000 years ago, during the events when the Unholy Alliance tried to invade our most sacred city, the saboteurs of the three Daedric devils, who defied the Cold Harbor Compact of Lord Sothis Sil, had made an attempt to destroy these halls, but in an act of awe-inspiring might, the defenders of the Halls of Regulation mounted a serious defense as they killed 1,000 attackers in a single minute. Blah, blah, blah. Tread carefully, friends, for the road ahead is full of danger and death. Wow, Both Glymet and Loneth looked at Coda with conflicted feelings. This thing almost killed my head from inside. Glymet held his head and backed off. He is amazing. To know such history about the events of the attack on this city after the Cold Harbor Compact. Loneth, on the other hand, was looking for her notes to write what Coda just said. Coda was a mystery that even rivaled Ram, the possible last child of one of two lost elven civilizations. Coda had many personality shifts depending on his situation. The normal Coda is a shy and naive childish young man. Coda. The others were a cranky and grumpy silent tinkerer who would appear whenever Coda starts working on something that depends on his tinkering skill. Smed. Another was a prankster with good awareness and survival skills. Another was the talkative historian from just now, Spam Tun. And the most recent of them, all the oversized berserking behemoth, Dragon. According to John, there was a female version of Coda when he started playing with Nefertiti, but that hasn't come out yet. Coda is a D&D Kobold PC from a campaign I'd met. It is safe to say that the player that is sponsoring him here has done some awesome role-playing during that campaign and would change personalities depending on what skill he is rolling. Despite the nonsense he spat just now, he was right about one thing. The Halls of Regulation has a ton of automated defense, even when it is deactivated and its functions relocated to the city. If they were to attack it now and reawaken its power, they had to go in strong and not get overwhelmed. But just as they were thinking of a plan, a booming sound started to echo in the air. Boom boom asterisk bobo biabum. Star. The sound came from the direction they came from just a few minutes ago, from the Vale of Tears direction. Is that John? Glymet asked. He said he wouldn't go outside the hideout since he shouldn't use magic. Loneth said. The two of them turned towards Ram and Coda. The two of them seemed to be knowing something, but rather than Coda's big-mouth persona, Ram seemed to be the one more aware of what was happening. Buying time, he said. Just as he said that, the patrols of factotums outside the Halls of Regulation started to redirect their route towards the nearby ruckus coming from the Vale of Tears. They are going for him, Loneth said, but will he use magic and risk allowing Messenger to track him? I'm not sure, Glymet replied, and turned to the other two. You two, there is something you are not telling us. Stuck with the two worst speakers on the Clockwork City, Glymet and Loneth seemed to be figuring something out and pressed with their gazes. Is not using magic, because he shouldn't, the meek Coda replied. He hasn't been able to do so since he arrived here. Since he arrived, John Dare, the infamous archwizard of Northern Skyrim, is unable to use magic. This is news to them just and now, and quite frankly something scary. We should hurry back. Loneth stood and faced the direction of the Vale of Tears in a rush. Wait, but Glymet held her arm to stop her. Let go, GLYM. We need to go. Stop it, Glymet said. Don't you see what he is doing? Also, if half the stories I heard about him are true, he will be okay. But that's dangerous. Loneth had a worried look as she looked at the Vale. He seems to have a plan, Glymet said. If we hurry up and activate the halls, all those automated factotums would cease functioning. And the halls are closer than him right now. Loneth calmed down and seemed to have realized the situation. I can't face Lady Nurina if something were to happen to him, she said, and immediately started leading the way towards the lightly defended Halls of Regulations. As for John, who just landed in the Vale of Tears with a boom, he was ready to face something that may be his worst match ever. John's own shadow. Chapter 681, Clockwork Trap. Chapter 681, Clockwork Trap. Things didn't seem to have gone as planned, but where John landed was one messy place. Fire was raining down all around him, and he was disoriented from the sudden impact. Nefertiti, answer me, he called and looked around, but as he looked up, he saw something falling down towards him, and with a strong burst of power, he ran away from its impact zone. Things didn't go as planned at all, and he put himself in a messy situation. If not for his strength, any normal person would have gone through one hell of an experience just landing like that. The place around him was large and wide, akin to a cave system with a sea of lava covering its floor. Only some rock spires stood tall, with traces of construction work at the sides of the cave. Messenger, John couldn't believe what happened just now. It was all going according to plan, until it wasn't. Messenger has managed to remotely activate the Barlizer's mazed band and take them all to Clockwork City. A week earlier to the arrival of Glymet and Lonith. John arrived at Clockwork City, but in a place where he had no idea which goes where. It was something akin to a huge cave with a deep pit of lava without any exit or escape. The perfect trap, if there was any. Using the Eye of Magicka spell, John tried to scout the space around him, but the Magicka was being siphoned off this space as if there was something wrong with the very core of the world. Messenger must have done something during their transfer to Clockwork City and made it so that John ends up here. What a cunning bastard. If John were to remain in this place for more than what he should, he would be worn out eventually, and Messenger would come to pick on him easily. That, of course, if he doesn't find an escape as soon as possible. Preserving his Magicka, John started to channel his inner energy and squatted on the rock spire he was on. With an incredible display of physical strength, John's leg muscles started to bulge up insanely as they tore through his pants, and with an insane shockwave, John jumped from the rock spire he was on to the closest. The distance was around 100 meters between the two spires, and John's jump almost fell short at the mark of 80 meters. For that, he curled his body and cast a novice spell, Air Bounce. Just like the spell's name, John bounced like a ball in the air, and his jump was extended for a long enough distance to land safely on the spire. He could have cast levitation and spared himself and his pants, but some gut feeling told him to be very careful on how to handle his Magicka, since his Magicka regeneration was practically not functioning in this environment. After repeating the process a few times, John was able to reach the wall of the cave at the construction area he spotted earlier. Where he landed was a metal platform that had a pedestal in its center, and it was made of many cogs and machinery, something that John couldn't understand from an initial look. However, this thing confirmed to him that he is in Clockwork City. It all looked like a Dwemer ruin around him, but it gave a very different vibe. Just how? As John asked that question, his answer came almost instantly. Ho, look at that place. A voice spoke with a cheerful glee. John looked around, but the voice came from everywhere around him. He narrowed his eyes and focused his aura to try and pinpoint the speaker. Don't waste your energy. I am speaking through the sound system of the pneumatic forge. The voice commented on John's reaction. Messenger. John spoke with obvious anger. Yes, John Dare, Dragonborn. Messenger replied in a vicious, mocking tone. I warned you to stay away, and you didn't listen. Don't think you'll survive this. John spoke. Oh, come on. Worry about yourself. Messenger replied. I've done extensive research about you, and I've got to say, I'm a big fan of you and your master, Lady Nurina. Moreover, you're a disciple from the student line of Divaith FYR. Your grandmaster and my master were comrades, you know, Divaith FYR and Sothis Sil. So are you the disciple of Set? I guessed as much. Set is short for Sothis Sil. Don't ask me why. The last disciple of Set. Messenger corrected John. While my master and I had a complicated relationship, I was the sole survivor of Almalexia Onslaught when she killed my master and all the other disciples. Almost all. I think I may find survivors now that I'm back. All right, introduction's over. Get your ass over here so I can start kicking. John said. Oh, you weren't listening, John Dare. Messenger said and made a creepy laugh. I told you that in Skyrim, I was in your realm. The world was fighting alongside you. I wasn't your match. So, here is where things get a tiny bit complicated, my friend. You, a Dragonborn. are a hero who is yet to fulfill his fate. I can't kill you and risk the world's retaliation. Yet. However, once I reach a position equal or higher than yours as a hero, you and I are going to have a different conversation than this friendly banter. Well, you have some good brain on that head of yours after all. John said, just one teeny tiny problem. You can't keep me here until you do what you're about to do. True. Messenger seemed to agree. However, I can keep you busy for as long as I want. Remember what I told you, John? Skyrim is your playground, but Clockwork City, that's mine. Oh, so what are you going to do? John asked with a challenging grin. That is the first time you disappoint me, John Dare. Messenger said in a voice devoid of emotions. This is the Pneumatic Forge. The Pneumatic Forge. The name doesn't ring a bell? No. Well, maybe Divaith FYR didn't want this secret to be known to anyone, I guess. Messenger contemplated audibly. Well, let me spoil his secret then. This Pneumatic Forge is the place where your dear Grandmaster almost lost his life to the Daedric Prince Nocturnal. Nonsense, John snorted. Even the Daedric Princes tremble on the mention of Divaith FYR's name. True, Messenger nodded. Everyone has their own ups and downs, though. So, have you ever heard about the glyph of Magia Memoria? Messenger asked a question that left John frowning. That frown, however, lasted a second before John decided to immediately clad himself with the best magical protection he could muster. However, too late. The glyph of Magia Memoria is a magical glyph used to investigate any magic that was cast in a certain location by diving through the fabric of time and space to recreate effects similar to the one that was just cast. It has many requirements, such as knowing which spell to look for, knowing the exact time and place it was cast in, etc. Still, these requirements were as easy as a breeze for an archwizard such as Messenger. I didn't go through all this trouble to redirect your arrival's route just for you to be delayed for a few hours. Messenger kept laughing as he watched the spell surround John. John felt it, the magic cast through the shadows, the spell that got a grip of him. He felt that something was growing around him, and in panic, he punched that shadowy figure. Back off, he shouted with a burst of physical power reinforced with his draining aura. As his hit landed on whatever that is, John felt so torn all of a sudden and looked to see that a shadow was separating from his own. Just as that shadow landed not too far from him, John realized what he just lost. No, John said, my magic. The shadow was John's entire magic casting ability, an aspect of his Anuic form that was torn from him by arcane means. This spell was once cast on Divaith FYR by Daedric Prince Nocturnal, but John only knew that from Messenger just now. Get over here. John immediately bolted toward the shadow, but the thing reflexively evaded him and cast a zap spell on John, moving him backward by a few meters. The shadow then decided to start running towards the exit it saw. Shit. As John saw his shadow escape like that, he tried to keep up, but he wasn't as fast as a shadow. Ha ha ha. Messenger kept laughing during that brief exchange. Try to keep up then. I'm sure it won't take you long, John Dare. Fucker. John shouted, and his voice started to break through the metal around him just by his raging Thursdayum. He kept running, and the traps of the Pneumatic Forge kept activating behind him as he avoided them all like a pro athlete. In the end, he managed to break out of the Pneumatic Forge to the site of the ruined Clockwork Realm, and it was when he lost track of his shadow. The event when Divaith FYR got his shadow separated from him happened in the first mission of the Clockwork City DLC in the Elder Scrolls Online. Back to the present. Just like how he landed once he arrived in Clockwork City, John landed towards the Vale of Tears in a barrage of mortar shells that he personally crafted for this event. Would not KSD. Before he lands with the bombardment alongside the shell he loaded himself into, John uses the whirlwind sprint to escape the fall by stepping on one of the shells and whirlwinding away. The place where the shells landed was the Vale of Tears, where Messenger's response force of the chimera-like fabricants, known as the Abominations, have gathered. Hell was let loose upon the monsters that were in the area, and the pillars of smoke became one large cloud of dust, smoke, and explosions. John's mortar strike was just as splendid as it was lethal, and he crash-landed not too far off the bombing site. Just like that, he remained there watching what he had done and waiting for the results to clear up. Unlike when Divaith Fyr was projected to the separation of his shadow and was greatly weakened, John is way younger than Fyr and didn't rely on magic to keep himself alive. Even more, John is both a fighter and a wizard, and his martial ability was on par with his magical ability. Moreover, he still had his Thursday which is a part of him more than anything else. His magic may come useless, and his body may fail him, but his voice will always be strong and dominating. But John loved his magic, and through it, he can do his greatest tricks with ease. That was the reason for this bombing. To begin with, this was why he had to draw out Mycenar's response force. As the dust cloud cleared and the fire eating away the place started to settle down a bit, a sphere of magicka could be seen in the center of the bombing site. There at its center was Mycenar's core power of his response force. John's shadow. It wasn't the first time John tried to retrieve his shadow by drawing out the response force, but this time, John managed to isolate his shadow by annihilating all the abomination it was using as a shield against John's martial prowess. You know what your problem is? John spoke to the shadow. Every day, every night, every waking moment of my being, I grow stronger. I trained both my body and my magic to stand on par with one another. But you, my shadow, my magic, you haven't had any training for a week while my body had double the juice. John smiled with a wider grin than ever before. Every day, I grow stronger. I am stronger than I was 1 second ago. Do you think you, the 1 week ago version of me, can match me now? John just wanted to give this cheesy speech, even though his shadow can't respond, and right now, he was going to do some heavy hitting in order to get his magic back. After a few hours of John's encounter with the shadow, Glymet and the team managed to crawl out of the Hall of Regulations with no injuries and unexpected gain. They even managed to rescue a member of the Tarnished that survived the massacre that happened to Coda's people who lived outside the Brass Fortress. According to that survivor, there is a secret tunnel not too far from the Halls of Regulation that can lead inside the fortress past its defenses. Hearing that, Glymet and Lonith insisted on going in despite Coda's frantic protest. If this was to work, they can rescue Swims at night without resorting to John's mad plan of going to war against the entire Brass Fortress. Chapter 682, Clockwork Apostles. Chapter 682, Clockwork Apostles. So this leads into the city? Glymet. Into the fortress. Tarnished Bosmare. Yeah, the fortress city. Glymet. It is just the fortress. Tarnished Bosmare. Wow, this is a city, right? Glymet. It is, but it is a fortress. Tarnished Bosmare. That doesn't make any sense. Glymet. This realm is the Clockwork City. The settlement is called the Brass Fortress. Tarnished Bosmare. That's confusing. Why not just call it the Clockwork Realm and the Brass City? Glymet. I don't know. Tarnished Bosmare. Glymet. Stop confusing everyone. Lonith shouted at the two men whose conversation was starting to irritate her. And you, if your route leads us somewhere filled with abominations, things won't look good for you. Yes, lady. I swear on Set's name. The Tarnished Bosmare was a member of one of Clockwork City's factions, the Nomadic Tarnished, a group of those who lack the skills required to become a Clockwork Apostle or are incapable of being merchants or craftsmen. As a result, they are cast out from the main settlement and the major facilities. Coda was also a Tarnished, but judging by the fact that neither Coda nor the Bosmare survivor recognized one another, it was easy to understand that the Tarnished people were split into many groups and clans. Either way, the Bosmare man offered a way into the Brass Fortress, and the group had to make a careful decision between this possible infiltration and John's angry plan of blasting everything that's moving. Seeing how John was already bombarding the response force Mycenar was sending and the fact that he did that even without magic, they knew that he would go to radical lengths in order to attain his goals. The problem which he seemed to not care about was the fact that swims at night may actually get caught in the crossfire, and that's against the whole purpose they have ventured here for. With this set mentality, the team decided to head towards the Brass Fortress, but Coda lagged behind and decided to return to John and inform him about their change of plans. As for Ram, he seemed to be willing to explore the fortress with them. It didn't take them long to arrive at an old tunnel that was transporting fresh air to the Brass Fortress from the halls of regulation. The tunnel had strong blasts of air current after it was dormant for the past 2 centuries, thanks to activating the halls of regulations, and the group had a rough journey through the tunnels all the way to the mechanical spires inside the Brass Fortress. As they managed to evade the rotors in the tunnel and exit it via a maintenance hatch, they found themselves on top of a vast city, vaster and wider than any city they've ever come across on Tamriel. The jewel of the Brass Badland, the Brass Fortress. The tarnished bossmare said with pride despite not being a resident of the city. Gods, a city made of metal and glass, Loneth exclaimed. The legends don't give it any justice. Yes, the bossmare nodded. You can consider yourself the first unlawful trespassers of the city since the fall of Lord Set. Its beauty can only be equaled by its arrogance. But just as the 4 of them started wondering about the appearance of this city of brass, a pillar of smoke was spotted rising from the eastern section of the city. I guess we're not the first trespassers after all. Glomit said, I don't think that's John Dare. We need to get down there. Loneth said, and instead of taking the maintenance ladder on the spire, she cast Featherfall on herself and jumped off the spire. I'm coming too. Glymit did the same and descended after her. The only ones that remained on the spire were the tarnished bossmare and Ram, who were transforming the mechanical body. Jet thrusters in fusion installed. Ram spoke in a motionless mechanical voice and started to levitate with a flame coming from tubes under his feet. The tarnished bossmare looked at how the others were moving around and back off from Ram. I'll be waiting here then. But before he would do anything, Ram held the bossmare from his collar and lifted him up as the man started screaming during the flight down. Once the group reached the source of the smoke, they were shocked by the fact that the things that were burning were actually some of Messener's abominations. There were no citizens or any living souls in the place they are in right now, which is a market square. What is happening here? Asked Glymit as he checked out the objects that were scattered on the ground. There's a lot of clutter and destruction, but what stood out was some weapons and blood splatters on the ground. Glymit crouched down to check out an item, which resembled the weapon that was being used by John, and frowned his thoughts. As for the others, they were looking around and taking note of the place that seemed to have a lot of food stalls and strange mechanical contraptions. While Loneth was focused on the machines, Ram was drawn to a certain screen that was viewing some visual illusions of scandalously dressed ladies with mechanical body implants. Ram was somehow mystified by the feeling he was experiencing, but just as he was about to interact with the holographic illusion, Loneth was there for the rescue. She swung her staff and destroyed the machines that were emitting this scandalous and improper view. By Azura, what are these deviants making a child look at? Loneth said with an angry tone, Ram, if you see anything like that, look the other way immediately. While a bit disappointed, Ram lowered his head and complied with what Loneth said. It was obvious that these illusions had stirred up something in him, but he was too confused to process what it was. But just at that moment of noise, when Loneth destroyed the hologram emitter, those who were adept in battle within this group, Loneth and Glymit, started to back off while warning Ram and the tarnished bossmare to back off too. The group retreated until they were all back to back as they sensed something they couldn't make heads or tails of. At that moment, and accompanied by the sound of magical machinery, many brass-armored figures started to appear from all around the market square while surrounding the group of adventurers. They were all humans, elves, beast folk, living, breathing mortals. Is that, by Azure it is, Loneth exclaimed. After all these centuries, there are still people down there. They must be the last of Sotha Sil's worshippers. Careful, I think At the lead of the staff-wielding band of clockwork apostles was a Dunmare wielding a large staff that reflected his leadership status. Just as sudden as he emerged with his people, he gave them the attack command. "More Outlanders, friends! Defend the city!" The man shouted, and all the people who emerged from the market square aimed their staves at the group of adventurers before sending a hail of spells and projectiles at them. "Wait, let's talk." Lonith seemed to be willing to drop her staff and talk peace, but the agitated crowd was far from being peaceful, and her words fell on deaf ears. Thanks to Glymit's fast reaction, he managed to pull her into cover and proceeded to retaliate immediately. As Glymit and Lonith hid behind a stall, Ram and the tarnished bossmare retreated into a hidden alley among the buildings. If Ram was to join this fight, his only weapon, the Gatling cannon, wouldn't be enough to convince those people of talking peace. That's why it was all left for Glymit and Lonith. Glymit jumped out of cover and vaulted at the nearest clockwork apostle before tackling and hitting him with the pommel of his sword. He evasively avoided all the attacks that were launched at him and arrived at where the apostle's leader was positioned, which happened to be a high wooden scaffolding. Glymit only needed to kick the scaffolding for it to crumble and the man on top to fall with it. Lonith made sure to defend herself and Glymit during that process, while disturbing the spells cast at her and stopping anyone from doing anything too dangerous until Glymit got the leader of the Clockwork Apostles and held him at a sword point. "All right, that's enough," she shouted, and all the people present in the market square could see what had become of their leader. As it was intimidating and frightful, Lonith chose to take the peaceful approach. "All right, Geowym, that's enough for you as well." Glymit nodded and retreated his sword away from the man's face before offering him a hand to stand. The Clockwork Apostles and the people of the city were all on edge and realized that their foes were surely powerful, but Lonith's next words were more assuring to them. "We came in peace," she said, and walked to Glymit's side, facing the leader of the apostles. The man seemed in pain as he held his back with his mechanical arm. Actually, everyone in this place seemed to have replaced their arms with mechanical ones. Some even replaced their legs, eyes, parts of their faces, and even had their torsos and chests filled with mechanical implants. Those were the real people of Clockwork City, the apostles of Sothis Sil. We thought you were with the other Outlanders." "You really aren't, are you?" the man asked. "We are not," Lonith replied. "My name is Lonith, and this is my companion Glymit. It is rather unexpected for us to end up in your realm, but we came here looking for another companion of ours, and those people who attacked you, Messner and his men, have taken him as a prisoner." "So it was Messner after all these years," the man sighed in grief. "My name is Galen. I'd welcome you, but as you can see, we are struggling against the invaders all alone." "Invaders?" "Messner, his lieutenants, those Outlanders. They were hunting our population for Messner to experiment and transform them. The apostles and I are holding this square as a defense choke point." Galen said, "Those Outlanders, they're treasure hunters. Maybe they have a friend. Which way did they go?" Lonith asked. "They headed towards the Mire Mechanica, and yes, they had a prisoner with them that was also an Outlander." Galen said, so which made both Glymit and Lonith hopeful that their friend is alive. "But please, they've also taken something important from us." Galen said, "The memory crystal of Sothis Sil, his last memory crystal, we hope you retrieve it for us. It is our most sacred holy relic." Lonith frowned since she had found some memory crystals as well in the halls of regulation and the ventral terminus. She was going to show them to John, so they can research them together at a later date. But if these memory crystals belong to Sothis Sil, it would be very important to acquire them. "All right," she nodded. "We will come back for sure, but we need your guidance to the Mire Mechanica. A safe passage from point A to B. That can be arranged." Galen nodded. "We will surely return since our way out of this realm is through this city, but let me ask you first, when we return, what can we expect from Messner?" she asked. "Messner, that bastard." Galen seemed to be more vexed every time that name was mentioned. He was once an apostle like us, but he walked a very different path, which led to his excommunication by Lord Set not too long before he passed. Messner is obsessed with surpassing Sothasil, so he will create the most bizarre things by combining machines and flesh. Look who's talking. Glymet spoke in a muffled tone as he stared at the apostle's mechanic implants. So, Lonith raised her voice to cover Glymet's. After we get your artifact and our friend, do you know a way out of the Clockwork City back to Nirn? The Brass Fortress Way Shrine. But that thing hasn't worked for years, and a few hours ago, there was a power outage in the entire city, so we need to fix them one problem at a time. Galen replied. And of course, Messner as well. Lonith said. That too. Galen nodded meekly, since he was asking them to take care of the archwizard that decimated everything in his way to get into the city. Lonith and Glymet had agreed on retrieving swims at night and escaping peacefully if possible, but things seemed to be progressing the way John had anticipated. Going head-to-head against Messner was always on the table, but now it has become inevitable. On their way to the Mire Mechanica, Lonith and Glymet informed John of their little side venture, and he seemed pleased to hear that there are clockwork apostles still living in the city. Still, he informed Lonith that he has amassed enough power and will be striking the city in 6 hours. He advised them to get swims at night during that time window and join him before then, since he needs 5 lieutenants to invade the city. By that time, the last thing anyone could expect was that by regaining his power, John had managed to assemble a small army of machines outside the fortress. Chapter 683, Clockwork Stars. Chapter 683, Clockwork Stars. After meeting Apostle Galen and the remaining clockwork apostles, the group headed outside the Brass Fortress through the secret tunnels. Glymet didn't seem to be willing to expose John's attack plan to the clockwork apostles in the city, but Lonith was too excited and revealed that reinforcements are waiting outside the city in order to take Messner out. With the same level of excitement, the clockwork apostles were very welcoming to the idea of taking on Messner and meeting those visitors from the outside world for the first time in 2 centuries. Of course, not all of the apostles were feeling the same, and some were fearing an invasion from more outlanders. Some said they would handle it on their own, and others seemed to be willing to take up arms against any more invading forces, but Galen, their leader, was adamant about receiving reinforcements. He said that whatever Messner is doing deep in the fortress may be disastrous if left alone more than this. Also, it seemed very obvious that Messner was afraid of whatever was out there and was sending a lot of his twisted creations to fight it and keep it in check. Galen seemed to know what Messner was after, but kept feigning ignorance no matter how many times Lonith asked. However, Glymet took note of that. In the end, the party of Glymet, Lonith, Ram, and their tarnished guide ended up in the Mire Mechanica and started searching for the treasure hunters that were hired by Messner, the ones who still had swims at night as their prisoner. The Mire Mechanica was a place of brass-colored land and deep pits of murky waters that were interconnected through old water pipes. This swampland seemed to have formed thanks to the leakage of some water pipes and its lack of maintenance, which slowly became contaminated with all sorts of diseases thanks to the microorganisms that started inhabiting these parts. Moreover, many other liquids were leaking in the swamps, which included refined and crude oil from the surrounding broken oil rigs. Many alien trees grew in these arid swamplands, and some were even growing through and around the brass pipes that were everywhere in this part of the land. As for finding the treasure hunters, it was like a stroke of luck when Ram was sending some feedback signals to the workshop at the Pavilion of Artifice where John was and happened to pick up a nearby signal that was being transmitted to somewhere inside the city. When Ram informed Lonith of that, she led the 4 of them to intercept whatever was emitting it. There, they found the treasure hunters. From how things seemed like, for treasure hunters were surrounding a pit that was being dug by someone, and they were all armed with advanced weaponry from Clockwork City. Glymet could tell that the one who was digging the pit for the treasure hunters was swims at night, as they seemed to be forcing them to dig out something in the murky swampland. As for getting swims out of this situation without endangering him, Glymet had a very simple plan. "Hey," Glymet called as he walked towards the treasure hunters. "The four of you. That's my friend you have there." As anger and hostility were displayed on his face, the treasure hunters aimed their weapons at him with menacing glares and obvious smirks. "Well, well, well, if it isn't the fool we got the ring from." The leader of the treasure hunters, the blondie called Aldora, spoke as she pointed with her sword at Swims. "Came for your friend?" "Swims." Lonith came out from hiding while taking some distance from Glymet. Lonith? Peeking his head from the pit, Swims couldn't believe his eyes, for the face he just saw was that of one of his oldest friends. This, however, seemed to have irritated the treasure hunters, as they weren't expecting more nuisance. "Hey, I'd hate to get in the way of your reunion with your mate, but how about this?" Aldora spoke and got behind the pit where Swims was. "Throw down your weapons and promise to leave us to plunder in peace, and you can have him." "Don't do it, Glym," Swims called, but Aldora kicked a stone against him to shut him up. "You want us to trust you? Not likely. We'll get him back the hard way." Lonith seemed fire up and her staff started to radiate with flame. "Wait, Lonith." Glymet, however, seemed more concerned about Swims and took off his sheathed sword from his belt and started to lower it down. "We're just here for our friend." "Wise choice," Aldora replied, and her smile curled upwards even more. "Although it just occurred to me, why don't we just kill you now and keep our captive?" "Yes, you can very much do that, or," Glymet said with an expressionless face, and then looked at Swims, "you can lower your head." Both Lonith and Glymet ducked to the ground immediately, and the sound of Gatling thunder broke through the calmness of the swamp forest as a hail of bullets made a BRRRT sound and tore through whatever it was aimed at. In an instant, and from left to right, the bullets decimated the heavily armored treasure hunter at the forefront of the group and blasted off the right arm of the Khajiit archer right next to him. The orc shamaness that was behind them transformed herself into a small creature and escaped immediately, while the Nord Aldora ducked to the ground almost the same instant Glymet and Lonith did. As the hail of bullets was over, Swims at Night attacked Aldora with his shovel, but she rolled away and started running towards where her orc friend did. She looked back at Glymet, who was chasing her, and shouted in rage as she watched her Khajiit comrade bleed to death. Glymet didn't chase Aldora for long and ran back to Swims and Lonith. He saw Lonith trying to pull Swims out of the pit, and so he too gave a helping hand. "Swims, thank Azure you're safe." As they sat together in the swamp, Lonith and Swims started catching their breath from the tension of the situation while Glymet stood over them. "What was that?" Swims asked with a shocked Argonian expression. "That insane attack. It almost blew my head off." "Survival estimation, 95%. A voice replied. Mechanical and emotionless, the owner of the voice stepped out from the cover of dried and charred bushes in his full brass body. Ram seemed to have switched his legs for caterpillar tracks, like a military tank, to withstand the power of the Gatling gun he just sprayed around. Seeing him, the Argonian Swims at Night had to stand alarmed. "Relax, it is a friend we met here. Call him Ram." Lonith said. "Seriously? Those things run errands for that crazy Messner wizard. Can't believe you tamed one," said Swims as he checked out Ram from a distance. "He's not a factotum. He's a real person trapped in one. If only he can tell us how, though." Glymet said. "John Dare introduced us to him." "Right." Swims became alert immediately, as if he remembered something dangerous. "John Dare. He's here." "We've met him," Lonith said, and stood up. "We need to reunite with him later, but we agreed to help the Clockwork Apostles with their memory crystal that was stolen by the treasure hunters. Now that they've run." Lonith seemed a little bit depressed, and Glymet shook his shoulder, since he's not going to chase some dangerous individuals like those treasure hunters into an unknown plane of existence like this. "Oh, you mean this?" At that moment, Swims at Night forked out something from his pocket. "That's..." Both Glymet and Lonith were lost for words, seeing the prize they agreed to collect for Galen and the Apostles in the hands of their sticky-fingered friend. "How did you get that?" Lonith asked. It looked valuable, so I swept it from those idiots, he said with the sinister laugh of a thief. You're a wonder, Swims. Lonith hugged Swims at night and looked at the memory crystal with glee. Let's move from this place first. We need to take a look at its content. And just as she was about to drag her allies and move towards the city, something came flying over their heads. The three adventurers lowered their heads and put on their defense, while Ram aimed up his Gatling gun and sprayed a hail of bullets at whatever that thing was with extreme prejudice and unshakable accuracy. That flying thing landed on a tree by getting impaled into one of its branches. As it stopped, it appeared that the flying thing was a headless body that somehow got flung by some extremely powerful attack. As for the head, it seemed to have fallen in a different location long before the body got sprayed with Ram's bullets. This body belonged to the orc shamaness that was with the treasure hunters and escaped first just a couple of minutes ago. As for what came next, all those who were present felt the sound of footsteps slowly approaching them. Ram, get ready. Glymet spoke. Disapproved, Ram replied with no interest whatsoever. What? The others felt anxious, as whatever was coming with nothing less than an imminent threat. As the footsteps got closer, two figures emerged from behind the dry trees. The first was Coda in his gigantic form, called Dragon, and the other was none other than John Dare, who was wearing armor this time around and dragging the blonde Aldora from her hair. Glymet, old man, John called while waving his free hand that had some smoke coming from it for some reason. Slaughter? Huh? Coda, Dragon, burst into maniacal laughter and started beating down the corpse of the armored treasure hunters with his oversized arm. Thunder Cookie. Again. Ha ha ha. Hey, P-Brain, only I could do Thunder Cookie. John shouted at Coda, Dragon. Only you. Coda, Dragon, tilted his head in wonder before realizing the truth. Sag. The others realized that John's iconic Thunder Cookie spell was the method used to blast the orc shamaness to death. The lethality of that spell was rumored to be able to make opponents explode on contact, and was used frequently by John, especially against the people he hated the most, namely the Thalmor agents. While the others recalled that, John ignored Coda, Dragon, whose depression shrunk him back to the normal Coda, and approached Glymet. You made contact with living clockwork apostles and found a memory crystal of Sothis Sil, said John to Lonith and Glymet. I can only say this day is getting better and better. You seem to have recovered your lost power. Lonith said, You've had me worried, you know. Sorry, Miss. Lonith, just don't rat me out to Mom. John said with a sleazy smile. So, can we take a look at the crystal? Do you have a method to crack it? Glymet asked. Well, now that I have recovered my magic, I can retrieve all my toys from my magical storage. I've all sorts of toys stashed over there, John said while showing off his armor, then continued. Also, don't you want to hear about my war plan? A war? You really want to go that far? Glymet asked with morbid expressions, seeing that John had filled the pavilion of artifice with various machinery. A battle is the right term, old man, John replied. Messner has an army, and I can't practice necromancy or conjuration easily in Clockwork City since I am not quite sure about the outer plane motions from this plane of existence. Even a magica in this place is kind of weird. Clockwork City has always been reported as a place with abnormal magica, but that can be said about all planes of existence. Lonith agreed. Indeed, even if Sothis Sil was aiming to create a world better than Mundus in his own words, he made limitations and restricted many freedoms over the magica of his realm. During my visits to various Oblivion realms, I noticed that many types of magic were restricted by the will of the lords of these realms, as the mortal plane of Mundus remains the realm with the most independent magica. John overanalyzed the subject with Lonith as colleagues. The vision of Lorcan, when he created Mundus, was indeed extraordinary, and counted on granting all living beings their freedom of choice. I guess we are still learning about the truth of the wheel and the tower, even to this day. Lonith agreed with him, making the rest of the group feel stupid and Glymet to be barely keeping up. But let's not forget that the dawn magic has been restricted to Mundus over the years. Can this be some sort of restriction made by Shore? Lorcan? John speculated. I still take the stand that the dawn magic was the key of creation, and we, the mortal races, are unable to access it due to our mortal limitation. What can be called dawn magic can actually be something far above our regular ability to cast magic, such as spells of higher tiers. Lonith explained her opinion. Forbidden magic? John made an understanding face. Precisely. A magic that can redo and undo reality is of a scale such as, all right, that's enough. Swims cried in both Lonith and John. Look at how dizzy everyone is, you goddamn nerds. Oh, sorry. John and Lonith retreated from their research ideas and returned to the topic at hand. So, the war efforts that I made. John stood from the circle around the fire and pointed at all the large boxes he gathered. Ladies, I present to you a pneumatic forge assembly line. Nobody clapped. John had to clear his throat and say the word again, but only Coda shifted his personality to Smeed and started praising John for collecting all this junk and tinkering it into something that looks useful. Emotionally damaged by the underwhelming praise, John started to explain his plan. So, the pneumatic forge is the place where Sotha Sil created his combat factotums. I ripped off some machines from over there that can help us recycle the junk all around this junkyard and transform it into combat factotums. John said with dampened spirit, and his speech pace increased while his eyes were turning hollow. It's all wired up to the power transformer into the Veil of Tears, which I had to bombard earlier this morning in order to mask my attack as an attempt to fight against Messner, while in fact, I was wiring these contraptions to the power grid in order to create an army of machines that can help us fight the army of abominations that is being assembled by Messner as we speak and coming to rip us all apart. All right, calm down, Glymet said with a sympathetic face. We were just messing with you. Of course we know what all this pneumatic forge. Pneumatic forge. Lonith corrected him. Yeah, don't worry, John Radson. We were just having a laugh. John said with gloom gathering over his head. And what about that woman? Lonith asked while pointing at the blonde Nord, Aldora. All that time, Aldora was locked in a makeshift cage. John tied her with the only type of knots he knew how to tie, which happens to be extremely kinky. John looked at the woman, right, Aldora, and I go way back, actually. She's a thief turned mercenary and sailor and treasure hunter from Dawnstar. I tried to hire her to the Dare Corps many times, but she is as dishonest as they come. No one from Dawnstar likes you, John, Lonith said. Aldora was conscious and looking at John with glaring red eyes. After all, he killed her band of mercenaries and seemed to have some rivalry with them. John fucking Dare. She spoke. Aldora the Daring, you really got to stop this, he replied. It seemed the rivalry between John and Aldora wasn't about mercenary work only, but also about titles. Dare and the Daring were awfully close to one another. The two of them led rival mercenary groups. While John's symbol was the dragon, Aldora's symbol was the eagle. As only one king of the sky was supposed to exist, John pushed Aldora and her group so far to the point where they had to operate on ships and become naval mercenaries, the field where he was also considered the best in thanks to his Magica-powered ships. She's part of the reason I dislike blondes, John said. You've got an Altmare girlfriend with blonde hair, last time I checked, Aldora said. Platinum, John corrected her. So, you took her for interrogation about Messner's plan? Glymet asked before the conversation derailed. I wouldn't bother with that murderous lying whore, but if you want to interrogate her, she's all yours, John replied. Personally, I like to focus on these memory crystals you collected. We've collected 3 of them, Lonith said. 1 from the ventral terminus, 1 from the halls of regulation, and the last from the treasure hunters. These memory crystals, or memory stars as the people here like to call them, are the records left by the dead god king Sotha Sil, John said, while taking a heavy breath of anticipation. What do you expect we'll find out? Lonith asked. Secrets, Coda, Spamton screamed, deep and dark. Truth. Ram reacted. Both. John nodded. And how will you read them? Glymet asked. John smiled and pointed at Ram. He can display them using his memory sockets. But there are two vital requirements that we need. John said in a serious voice. What can they be? Glymet asked in full seriousness. Drinks and popcorn. With that, John and the group were about to witness the most important memories left by the creator of Clockwork City, the tribunal deity Sotha Sil. Chapter 684, Clockwork Heart. Chapter 684, Clockwork Heart. The mechanical sound of Ram's inner workings indicated his system accepting the new memory crystal. Ram's head alone can accept more than just one memory crystal and other add-ons that may add to his functionalities and personal memories, but right now, John asked him to display the memory crystals that Glymet and Loneth acquired. These memories were displayed on a blank sheet of cloth, which John spread over one of the assembly line box-like machines, so that Ram can aim his head towards it and send out the light and the sound that will project the memory. In other words, it is movie night now, but right from the get-go, a voice was heard from the recording along with the visuals of eye blinking. John and the group gathered closer to the projected image in order to figure out what they were seeing. It seemed that the memory was acting less than a movie, but more like a record when the thoughts of the memory owner started to form together. This day has appeared in all my simulations. The end. My dear friend Almalexia has come to kill me. Now, everything depends on my calculations being correct. My machines need 22 minutes to seal the chamber of Lorcan, so that's how long I must live. A living deity at his final moments. For those who aren't aware about the events of 200 years ago, the three living deities of Morrowind lost their divine power with the disappearance of the Heart of Lorcan, which was caused by the Nerevarine, in order to stop the mad Daguth Yuar. This affected them greatly. The Clockwork City was being threatened to cease existing, and the meteor floating above Vivec City was no longer stabilized by Vivec's power and would soon crash. Whereas Mournhold, the city of Almalexia, had no abnormalities like the two, it was sunk in discord and turmoil. By that, Vivec was driven into more mysteries above his mysteries. Sotha Sil started working on his final desperate research, and Almalexia was just driven mad. The madness of Almalexia was directed towards the other two living deities, Sotha Sil and Vivec. She staged an attack by the clockwork creatures of Sotha Sil as a pretext to invade the Clockwork City and kill Sotha Sil. Your time has come, Sotha Sil. All these years you've looked down on me. Have you any last words? Illustrious and endlessly beautiful and mad, Almalexia marched in her battle gear that outlined her curves just as neatly as it exposed her golden chimer skin. I am. Sotha Sil had a long sigh before thinking of her name and not uttering a single word. The woman that was the healing mother, the Lady of Mercy, and Mother Morrowind, was reduced to a raging, murdering madwoman, and the red of her hair was extended by the blood of the clockwork apostles she spilled on the way to the dome of Sotha Sil. Their fight was a swift one. Sotha Sil was a mage, but Almalexia was a warrior and a cut above any other warrior, one that lived through hundreds upon hundreds of years and warred with many Daedra princes and Akaviri warlords and vanquished them all. Your time has come, Sotha Sil. All these years you've looked down on me. Have you any last words? Almalexia took the silence of Sotha Sil as arrogance and cursed them with malice and hatred. Why are you silent? What are you hiding? Speak, curse you. Almalexia shouted till it actually made Sotha Sil almost lose focus. Fine then. Die, old friend. Fall before the one true God. Almalexia finished Sotha Sil with her blade Hope's Fire and watched him as he was left hanged and mingled on his machines. Sotha Sil's last fleeting thoughts started to echo through the memory crystal as the scene was fading to darkness. I have done it. He spoke as if he had done something big, something that made his last moments worth it, something that required his focus to be somewhere distant from the fight with Almalexia. I die, but what is death? A natural function. The thoughts became quieter, but Sothisil still had that same level of enthusiasm that filled him with a strange power, as if he was more alive than anyone else. The chamber is sealed. The work has begun. It will take approximately 207 years. But what is that? A rounding error. And then the words that made John spit his drink and Lonith scream from their wild shock were heard. The new heart of Lorcan will be completed, and it will power my city for all eternity. For those who understood the true meaning of these words from the memory crystal, the mention of the heart of Lorcan was akin to ringing bells and roaring thunder in their heads. John's stomach churned over so bad that he ran and started puking all its content. Lonith was so pale that by Dunmere standards, she would be a snow elf. But aside from the two, the rest had no deep knowledge of the arcana aside from Glymit's brief readings in the books he rarely enjoyed. The heart of Lorcan? Wasn't that a stone buried deep in the Red Mountain? Glymit asked. What's that anyway? Swim seemed to be less informed than Glymit regarding the heart. Azura, save us. Lonith shivered in clear panic. Should we get PPP panic too? Coda asked with worry consuming him and causing him to stutter. Certainly, Ram answered emotionlessly. Lonith looked closely at the crystal that was embedded on Ram's head and felt hesitant before speaking on the verge of panic. The heart of Lorcan is one of the most powerful and dangerous artifacts in history, if not the most. It's what Sothisil and the other two tribunals used to become gods. She said with an obvious grim look, the stone disappeared from the world and was said to be destroyed. Liberated. At that moment, John, who was done vomiting and returned to the group with a sickly face, interrupted Lonith. The champion of Morrowind, the Nerevarine, liberated the heart of Lorcan by destroying the enchantment that sealed it in the Red Mountain. It returned to the world as it should be. I don't understand. Glymit spoke. Whether it is destroyed or liberated, Lorcan is the name of the divine being that created the world. I, at least, know that his heart was ripped from him as a punishment for creating mortality, and it was turned to a stone and sealed in a volcano. Ripped from him, yes. Turned to stone, maybe. Sealed in a volcano, no. John commented. The heart itself was so powerful that it formed the volcano around itself when it fell into the sea. The dragon god fastened the heart on an arrow and sent it away so that the followers of Lorcan couldn't recover it. Lonith added, the War of the Red Mountain happened between my ancestors, the Nords, Lonith's ancestors, the Chimer, and possibly Ram's ancestors, the Dwemer if we are not mistaken. The Nords tried to make sure Lorcan recover his heart, but the Chimer and the Dwemer opposed them. This led to the complete disappearance of the Dwemer as a race from all parts of Tamriel. The leader of the Chimer, Indoril Nerevar, was killed by his lieutenants who later used the artifacts of the Dwemer and the heart of Lorcan on themselves to become god kings. These three lieutenants are Sothisil, builder of Clockwork City, Nerevar's wife Almalexia, who killed Sothisil in the memory we just saw, and lastly Vivek, who disappeared during the Oblivion Crisis. Wow, Swims at Night exclaimed. That's a lot of history. I feel like I've heard different accounts of this story before, but these were like folk tales when I was young. Historical facts, I'm afraid. Lonith said before turning to Ram. I am sorry. We were planning to tell you the truth slowly and carefully. While expecting the young child to be devastated by either the disappearance of his possible race or the change of his other possible race, his response was rather. I see. Ram replied in the same emotionless mechanical voice he uses, but this time more of his personality was being conveyed. Both John and Lonith were suspecting him to be either Chimer or Dwemer. They haven't arrived at a conclusive answer yet, but as far as they are concerned, all there is to Ram is an incomplete personality construct stored on a memory crystal. But to think the heart of Lorcan is in this place, John immediately returned to the main issue they have on hand. It is not the real one, Lonith corrected him. It is a new one made by the machines. How can mere machines replicate the heart of Lorcan, to begin with? John asked. We have seen the Eye of Magnus, another artifact that was attributed to an original spirit, Glymet said, and asked, by any chance are they the same thing? The Heart of Lorcan, the Eye of Magnus, how related are they? It can be that if a part of an original spirit was separated from them, they would turn into an artifact. John theorized. Loneth and John started thinking about the possibility, but there was no reference they know of, or at least remember. On the other hand, Glymet seemed to be thinking as well. He remembered the confrontation he had with the Thalmor emissary in the College of Winterhold, the Altmare who was called Ancano. During his brief visit to Winterhold, Glymet assisted the College of Winterhold to defeat that Ancano when the latter managed to tap into the power of the Eye of Magnus and was almost unkillable, if not for the Staff of Magnus that was recovered and used by Alina Dare to take control of the Eye of Magnus. So, this new Heart of Lorcan, are there any tools to control it, like the Staff and the Eye of Magnus? Glymet asked. His question came with a memory of what he glimpsed in the core of the Eye of Magnus. Something he couldn't fathom back then, and no matter what he tried to remember what he saw and what he heard, it slips through his mind like a dream he saw a long time ago. The tools of Kagranak. Loneth shouted immediately in response to Glymet's question. They are the artifacts that can. She then stopped talking immediately and turned to John. If they can, how can we acquire them? Glymet asked, but the answer was already in front of him. The tools of Kagranak, the 3 Dwemer artifacts that were crafted by Craftlord Kagranak of the Dwemer race. The first time they were used on the original Heart of Lorcan, they caused an entire race to disappear. John had those artifacts long ago before he left Skyrim on his 3 years journey around Tamriel. He acquired them to fix his broken body after he managed to escape from the realm of Cold Harbor when he was trapped there by the vampires of the Fokihar clan. These 3 artifacts are the Dagger Keening, the Hammer Sunder, and the single Gauntlet Wraithguard. Each of the 3 artifacts has a very vital use during the process of utilizing the energy of the Heart of Lorcan. The Gauntlet Wraithguard was designed to protect the user from the other 2 artifacts, as their powers were a league beyond what any mortal body can endure. It was also designed to empower the other 2 artifacts. The Hammer Sunder would be used to strike the heart and cause a specific type and amount of energy to be emitted from it. The enchantment of the hammer can draw vital and magical essence without touching the life essence of the heart. As for the Dagger Keening, it was sharp enough to cut through and reshape the energy of the heart that was drawing like sculpting on a clay mold. Its enchantment can also help with transforming and absorbing this power. You had these tools on you all the time? Swims at Night asked. I am this generation's owner and keeper of the tools of Kagranak. John replied with a foreboding tone. Morrowind has made many complaints over the years, and asked me to hand them to the Dunmery Council, but these things are on a scale with weapons of mass destruction. I wouldn't trust a soul with them. That applies to everyone here. But Loneth tried to argue, but John interrupted. This new heart, whatever it is, may prove to be a tremendous pain in the ass for us. If the time comes and I find a need to destroy it, I will. John stated, Thank you. Loneth nodded. I trust your judgment. Can't we take it and, sell it? Swims asked. Everyone turned to Swims at Night with their eyes void of any expressions. Oh, did I speak that thought out loud? Swims backed off right away with an awkward laugh. I have a Daedra Titan pet called Zykil. I'll send him after your ass if you were to ever think of the idea of recalling the moment you had that thought, ever again. By Sid his. You guys can't take a joke. Swims made sure to put between him and John a good enough distance to start running for his life if the need arose. Then the new Heart of Lorcan is what Messenger after all along? Glymet asked. If he already has that, I doubt any of us would still be alive. John said, Let's hope the project was a failure and try to kill Messenger as soon as possible. Indeed. Glymet agreed with John wholeheartedly. From what I understand, the heart is vital for the life of this realm. We should consider leaving it be once the threat is dealt with. Destroy the new heart or preserve it. A tough decision that holds the fate of the entirety of Clockwork City and its inhabitants. A decision they'll have to take when the time comes. We need to gather more information then. Swims at Night spoke. We have more of these crystals, so let's see what they hold. He may have just spoken what was on everyone's mind, and from this point, they gave Ram the 2 remaining memory crystals. The information on these crystals didn't offer as big of a surprise as the first, but they learned a few more things. Some of these memories were the lessons Sothis Sil gave to one of his best apostles, Messner. Messner was young in these memories and quite the eager and ingenious apprentice. He worked hard to please Sothis Sil and gain his acknowledgement, but Sothis Sil was always aloof and distant. Sothis Sil suspected Messner's betrayal before it even arrived, but what he didn't suspect was the abominations that were created by Messner, the same things he creates now to fight off John. Sothis Sil banished Messner from Clockwork City and changed the locking combination on the chamber of Lorcan that contained the new mechanical heart. This was the good news that finally made the group calm down. If Sothis Sil has secured the chamber, it would take Messner a lot of time to crack the locking combination. The other memory crystal was one much earlier than that of Messner or the mechanical heart. It was about Dagoth Uar, the enemy of the tribunal gods. Long ago, during the War of the Red Mountain between the Nords, the Chimera, and the Dwemer, Dagoth Uar was a subordinate of Lord Indoral Nerevar, leader of the Chimera, just like Almalexia, Vivek, and Sothis Sil before their apotheosis. In the account where the tribunal gods betrayed their leader Nerevar and used the power of the tools of Kagranak on the heart of Lorcan, Dagoth Uar opposed them and tried to avenge Nerevar, but ended up defeated and presumed dead under the Red Mountain. Other accounts claim that he betrayed Nerevar, but that is mostly the side of the story told by the tribunal. After centuries, Dagoth Uar and his people, the House of Dagoth, were mutated by the effects of the heart of Lorcan after they were driven to extinction. They returned as ash vampires, beings of terrible power and extreme violence, and they ambushed the tribunal and ripped them off their divine powers, which caused the living gods to slowly decline over the years. At the end of the memory, Sothis Sil seemed to have created a new hidden chamber beyond the inner curiosity where the new mechanical heart was revealed. This memory showed how to access that chamber. Knowing how to reach the mechanical heart and how to exploit it, the team was finally a league of steps ahead of Messner. Only one thing remained. Activate the assembly line. John spoke and started punching switches on the machines he put together. By dawn, our army will be produced, and we will go to war. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.